Welcome back, and thank you for tuning into Cheating Tales Lab. We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know, what part of the world are you watching from right now? Let us know in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story. Daniel Conway stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Grand Meridian Hotel's ballroom, watching the city lights flicker below while nursing his second scotch. The annual Trans-Global Logistics Gala bustled behind him, a sea of designer dresses and tailored suits that probably cost more than what his employees made in a month. He ran his logistics division with precision and care, ensuring his 200 employees across 3 states had good benefits and fair wages, even if it meant smaller bonuses for himself. "Daniel, darling, you're not networking." Natalie's voice carried that familiar edge of disapproval. She appeared at his side in a red Valentino dress that had caused their first real argument in months. $4,000 for a single evening's wear had seemed excessive, but she'd insisted it was an investment in their future. "I've been talking with the Milwaukee team about implementing the new automated tracking system." Daniel turned to face his wife, noting how her carefully styled blonde hair caught the chandelier light. After 16 years of marriage, she was still stunning, but lately, her beauty felt like a carefully constructed facade. "Nobody wants to hear about work systems at a party," Natalie sighed, her green eyes already scanning the room. They stopped, brightening, and Daniel knew before turning what or rather who had caught her attention. Richard Whitaker commanded the center of the room like a conductor before his orchestra. The new CEO's Harvard MBA and family connections had fast-tracked him to the top position 6 months ago, and he hadn't stopped reminding everyone since. "Richard was just telling us about his new yacht," Natalie gushed, already moving toward the crowd. 45 feet, custom-built in Monaco. "Come join us, darling. You might learn something." Daniel watched his wife slide effortlessly into the circle around Richard, who immediately made space for her at his side. At 45, Whitaker embodied what magazines called silver fox charm, salt and pepper hair, tennis club tan, and the kind of confidence that came from never having faced real consequences. "Your wife's quite something, Conway." Marcus Wheeler appeared beside him, clapping his shoulder with forced joviality. Daniel's friend since college had changed since taking over the East Coast operations, becoming more politician than logistics expert. "She's really embraced the executive social circle." "She has," Daniel replied neutrally, watching Richard lean close to whisper something in Natalie's ear that made her laugh too loudly. "How's Sarah?" "Busy with the kids' college applications." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Listen, Dan, maybe you should join them. Richard's been asking about your division's performance." Daniel took another sip of scotch. "My quarterly reports speak for themselves. We're up 12% in efficiency and 8% in profit margins. Numbers aren't everything in this business anymore," Marcus said carefully. "Richard has a vision for modernizing. Through outsourcing and cutting corners," Daniel cut in. "I've read his proposals. They'll gut our quality control and overwork our people." The conversation around Richard suddenly erupted in laughter. Daniel caught fragments about someone's new summer house in the Hamptons, then Natalie's voice rising above the others. "Oh, Richard, you simply must show us pictures of the yacht's master suite." Later that night, after a silent drive home in separate cars, Natalie had insisted on staying just a bit longer to discuss some charity event with Richard's circle. Daniel sat in his home office reviewing quarterly projections. The shared family iPad chirped with a message notification. He usually ignored Natalie's devices, but something intuition or fate made him glance at the screen. The message preview showed Richard's name and the words, "Missing you already, beautiful. Can't wait for." Daniel's hand was steady as he picked up the iPad. Natalie had forgotten to log out of her messages again, a careless mistake that seemed less like forgetfulness now. He scrolled through months of conversations, each message driving another nail into 16 years of marriage. "The beach house is free this weekend. Marcus won't be using it. That dress today. You're torturing me in meetings. Daniel's so boring at these events. You deserve someone who can match your sophistication." The front door opened and closed. High heels clicked on hardwood. Daniel didn't turn when Natalie appeared in the office doorway. "You're still up?" Her voice held artificial lightness. "It's past midnight." "How long?" Daniel kept his voice level, turning the iPad screen toward her. Natalie stiffened for just a moment, then her shoulders relaxed. A small, cruel smile played at the corners of her mouth. Does it matter? Months. Since Richard took over. With Marcus's help. Using his beach house. Daniel stood slowly. Were you ever going to tell me? Eventually. Natalie stepped into the office, her expensive perfume filling the space. Once everything was arranged. Richard's lawyer is excellent, and with his connections, she shrugged elegantly. You must have known this was coming. You're just a small-time manager, Daniel. Regional operations? Please. Richard is everything you're not: ambitious, sophisticated, connected. He knows what real success looks like. Real success, Daniel repeated softly. Like buying your way to the top with daddy's money and an overpriced MBA? Don't be bitter, darling. It's unattractive. Natalie examined her manicure. I've already spoken with the girls. They understand completely. The casual mention of their daughters hit harder than anything else. You involved our children in this? They're 16, not babies. Emily and Lucy know what's best for them. Natalie's smile widened. Richard's already looking into summer programs in Switzerland for them. The kind of opportunities you could never provide. Daniel sat back down at his desk, his voice deadly calm. Get out of my office, Natalie. We'll discuss this with lawyers present. Gladly. Natalie turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Daniel? Richard's lawyer will be in touch about the house. We'll need you to move out by the end of the month. The girls shouldn't have to deal with awkwardness. The betrayal spread through Daniel's life like poison, revealing rot in relationships he'd thought solid. Marcus Wheeler, his friend of 20 years, avoided his calls for a week before finally agreeing to meet at their usual bar. I should have told you, Marcus admitted, not meeting Daniel's eyes. But Richard, he's the future of the company, Dan. Sarah and I have the kids' college to think about, and his plans for restructuring. Save it. Daniel's voice could have frozen hell. 20 years of friendship, and you helped him screw my wife. Was lending them your beach house part of your promotion package? Marcus flinched. It wasn't like that. Natalie said you two were already having problem. We weren't. Daniel stood, dropping cash on the bar. But we sure as hell have them now. Goodbye, Marcus. Good luck with the restructuring. His sister Catherine was next. They met at her favorite CF, where she'd insisted on buying him coffee to talk things through. Catherine had always been the family mediator, the reasonable one. But today her reasonable tone felt like sandpaper on raw skin. You have to understand, Danny, she began, stirring her latte. Natalie was feeling trapped. Richard opened her eyes to a whole different world: country clubs, charity galas, real society. I just helped her navigate it a bit, showed her and the girls around. While she was cheating on your brother, Daniel's coffee sat untouched. How long have you been playing tour guide, Kath? Catherine had the grace to look uncomfortable. The girls loved it. You should see them at the club, Danny. They've made such wonderful connections. Daniel cut her off. That's what we're calling it now? Tell me, does your husband know you helped destroy your brother's marriage for country club access? That's not fair. Catherine protested. I was thinking of the girls' futures. Emily and Lucy deserve to learn that betrayal is acceptable if the price is right. Daniel stood. You're their aunt, Catherine. You were supposed to protect them, not help corrupt them. The final blow came during what was supposed to be a family dinner with the twins. Daniel had made their favorites, Emily's chicken parmesan and Lucy's fettuccine alfredo, hoping food might bridge the growing chasm between them. Instead, Lucy spent the first 20 minutes texting under the table, occasionally showing Emily something that made them both giggle. When Daniel asked about school, Lucy finally looked up, her expression a perfect mirror of Natalie's earlier cruelty. Actually, Dad, we need to talk about that. Lucy set her phone down with deliberate care. Uncle Richard the first mean. Richard says we should probably switch to Lancaster Prep. All his friends' kids go there, and it's much more prestigious than Westfield. Uncle Richard, Daniel repeated quietly. Since when do you call him that? Since he started acting more like a father than you ever did. Lucy shot back. He actually cares about our futures. He's taking us to Paris for spring break. Did you know that? While you're stuck here obsessing over your boring logistics job. Lucy. Emily spoke for the first time, her voice uncertain. She'd always been the more sensitive twin, more attuned to others' feelings. No, Em. He needs to hear this. Lucy leaned forward, her 16-year-old face hard with practiced disdain. We want to live with Mom and Richard. We shouldn't waste time with losers like you. Richard said. Richard says a lot of things. Daniel's voice could have cut diamond. Tell me, Lucy, did your mother and Uncle Richard explain exactly how their relationship started? About the months of lying, using Marcus's beach house for their meetings? Mom said you'd try to turn us against them. Lucy stood up, her chair scraping back. Come on, Emily. Richard's driver is waiting outside anyway. We're done here. Emily hesitated, looking between her sister and father. For a moment, something like regret flickered across her face. Then Lucy grabbed her arm, and the moment passed. Sorry, Dad, she muttered. Following her sister out, Daniel sat alone at the dinner table, looking at the untouched food. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticked away seconds that felt like funeral bells. The law offices of Chung and Associates occupied the entire 42nd floor of a downtown high-rise. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the city, but Daniel wasn't here for the scenery. He sat across from Teresa Chung, Natalie's shark of a lawyer, while his own attorney shifted uncomfortably beside him. Let's be realistic, Mr. Conway. Cheng's smile never reached her eyes. Your wife has endured years of emotional neglect while you focused on your career. Meanwhile, she dedicated herself to raising your daughters and maintaining your social standing. The courts will take that into consideration. Emotional neglect? Daniel's lawyer, James Foster, sputtered. Mrs. Conway engaged in a months-long affair. Allegedly, Chung cut in smoothly. And even if true, one could argue it was driven by Mr. Conway's persistent absence and inability to meet his wife's emotional needs. The children's testimony will support this. You're putting my daughters on the stand? Daniel's voice was dangerously quiet. Emily and Lucy are old enough to speak to the court about their experiences. Chung shuffled some papers. They have very clear memories of missed recitals, abbreviated family vacations, endless work calls. Because I was supporting their private school tuition and their mother's designer wardrobe, Daniel replied evenly. Tell me, Ms. Cheng, will you also be presenting evidence of how that affair began? The text messages? Marcus Wheeler's beach house receipts. Cheng's smile tightened fractionally. Mr. Conway, let's be civilized. Your wife is prepared to be generous. You can keep your retirement accounts, and we won't seek alimony if you agree to surrender the house and primary custody. Generous? Daniel leaned forward. She cheats on me, turns my children against me, and you call that generous? Daniel, Foster warned quietly. The girls have already expressed their preference to live with their mother, Chung continued. Given their age, the court will likely honor that. Fighting this will only drain your resources and traumatize your children further. Sign the agreement, Mr. Conway. Walk away with some dignity. The courtroom was worse. Natalie sat beside Richard, both perfectly groomed and coordinated in expensive suits. She'd even coached the twins on their appearance. Emily and Lucy wore matching blue dresses that made them look younger, more vulnerable. Lucy's testimony came first, delivered with practiced precision. Dad was never really there for us, she declared, eyes wide with rehearsed sadness. He missed my ballet recital for a business meeting. When Mom and Richard started spending time together, it was different. Richard really listens. He makes time for family. Emily followed, less polished but equally damaging. Dad's always been distant, she said, not quite meeting his eyes. More interested in his work than us. Richard helps us with college planning, introduces us to people who matter. The judge's ruling felt like a formality. Daniel lost the house he'd spent 15 years paying for, primary custody of his daughters, and most of their joint savings after Natalie's lawyer argued successfully about maintaining the children's standard of living. Only Glenn Wynn from the Logistics Technology Department showed any loyalty, helping Daniel find a small apartment and quietly sharing internal reports about Richard's management decisions. He's gutting quality control, Glenn reported over beers in a dive bar far from their usual haunts. Outsourcing everything he can, cutting corners on safety protocols. The board's eating it up because short-term profits are up, but it's going to implode eventually. Eventually doesn't help me now, Daniel replied, staring into his glass. No, Glenn agreed. But knowledge is power, my friend. And I've got copies of every bad decision he's making. Just keep them somewhere safe. You never know when having friends in the right places might matter. Daniel nodded slowly, thinking of his automated logistics system plans still saved on his personal laptop. You're right, Glenn. You never know. The empty apartment echoed with each keystroke as Daniel worked late into the night. 3 months after the divorce, he'd transformed the spare bedroom into a makeshift office, with whiteboards covering the walls and a dual-monitor setup on a simple IKEA desk. His laptop displayed complex flowcharts of the logistics management system he'd conceptualized years ago but never had time to develop. Another internal report from Glenn landed in his encrypted email, more evidence of Richard's systematic dismantling of TransGlobal's quality controls. Each document painted a picture of impending disaster. Safety protocols ignored, experienced staff replaced with cheaper alternatives, maintenance schedules stretched beyond industry standards. Patient zero of corporate cancer, Daniel muttered, adding the new data to his growing archive. A notification popped up, another Instagram post from Lucy, tagged at Richard's Hamptons estate. The photo showed his daughters in designer swimwear on a yacht, champagne glasses raised. The caption read, "Living our best life with Dad 2.0. #blessed #luxury life." Daniel's jaw tightened. 16-year-olds drinking champagne on a yacht with their mother's affair partner, it perfectly encapsulated everything wrong with Richard's world. He closed the tab without commenting. They learn about consequences soon enough. His phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. "Danny, please. The girls miss you. Richard's taking them to Monaco next week." Delete. Block. His sister had chosen her side, trading family loyalty for country club access. The apartment's ancient coffee maker chose that moment to die with a final, protesting gurgle. Daniel grabbed his laptop bag and jacket, heading for the 24-hour coffee shop 3 blocks away. The night air felt clean, washing away hours of screen glare and code. The collision happened just outside the coffee shop's door. Lost in thoughts about system architecture, Daniel didn't notice the woman juggling her laptop bag and coffee until it was too late. Her coffee splashed across his laptop bag, and research papers scattered across the sidewalk. "I'm so sorry." She dropped to her knees, gathering papers. "I was reviewing research notes while walking. Terrible habit." As Daniel helped collect the papers, he noticed complex behavioral flowcharts and psychological analysis of corporate structures. One diagram particularly caught his eye. It perfectly mapped the dysfunction he'd witnessed at TransGlobal. "These are fascinating," he said, studying a chart. "Corporate hierarchy impact studies? This pattern here, it's exactly what I saw happen when our new CEO took over." "Yes." She looked up, revealing intelligent eyes behind simple frames. "I'm Dr. Olivia Blake, industrial psychology at State University. I'm researching how corporate structures influence human behavior and efficiency." She tilted her head, studying him. "You understand these models?" Daniel Conway, former regional operations manager at TransGlobal Logistics. He handed her the papers. "Your research on hierarchical resistance to innovation, it matches patterns I've seen throughout my career. Most systems fail because they ignore human factors." Inside the coffee shop, under fluorescent lights that made midnight feel like noon, Daniel found himself explaining his vision for Logitech. Olivia asked sharp, insightful questions that forced him to refine concepts he'd thought were finished. "The fundamental flaw in most logistics software," she said, sketching rapidly on a napkin, "is assuming human beings operate like machines. They don't. People resist change not because they're stubborn, but because most systems ignore basic psychological needs for autonomy and competence." "Exactly." Daniel pulled out his laptop, showing her his preliminary designs. "Traditional logistics software treats workers like cogs. I want to build something that adapts to how people actually work." "This is brilliant," Olivia said, studying his flowcharts. But you'll need someone who understands both the psychology and the technical requirements. She paused, considering. Actually, I know someone perfect for this. Melissa Newman, she's a brilliant software engineer who left Silicon Valley because she was tired of creating apps that ignored human factors. She's been consulting on my research. 2 days later, they met Melissa at a small cafe near the university. At 40, she carried herself with the confident focus of someone who knew exactly how good she was at her job. She reviewed Daniel's code with brutal efficiency. Silicon Valley's dead, she declared, making rapid notes. They're all chasing the next social media unicorn while ignoring real business needs. This, though, she tapped his laptop screen. This could revolutionize logistics. But you'll need help with the architecture. I can pay, Daniel began. Not interested in salary, Melissa cut him off. I want equity. 20%, plus control over technical architecture. Dr. Blake consults on user psychology, you handle the business side, and I'll build you a system that makes TransGlobal look like they're using stone tablets and chisels. Deal, Daniel said. When can you start? Melissa was already typing. Your basic architecture is solid, but the data flow needs optimization. Give me a week. I'll have a prototype that'll make your ex-wife's new CEO boyfriend look like the overpaid hack he is. About that, Olivia interjected carefully. I've been reviewing TransGlobal's public filings. Their efficiency metrics are dropping significantly. If we move quickly, we could capture their market share while they're vulnerable, Daniel finished. He opened his laptop, showing them Glenn's latest reports. Their new CEO's cutting corners everywhere. Safety protocols, maintenance schedules, quality controls all sacrificed for short-term profits. Classic narcissistic leadership pattern, Olivia observed. Immediate gratification over long-term stability. Your system's emphasis on adaptive efficiency could appeal to their frustrated clients. Melissa was already coding. Give me 2 months. We'll build something that makes their system look prehistoric. Over the next 2 years, Daniel's apartment transformed into Logitech's unofficial headquarters. The spare bedroom became a proper office, with Melissa's workstation beside his. Olivia's research papers and psychology models covered one wall, while code diagrams filled another. Their routine fell into a comfortable pattern. Mornings began with coffee and market analysis. Afternoons were for coding and testing. Evenings stretched into night as they refined their system, fueled by takeout and determination. The traditional logistics model is hierarchical, Olivia explained one evening, sketching on their newly installed whiteboard. But human beings naturally form networks. Your system needs to reflect that. Melissa typed furiously at her station. We can build adaptive pathways. The software learns each user's patterns and adjusts accordingly. Their dinner discussions evolved into weekend strategy sessions. Olivia brought an understanding of human behavior that transformed their technical solutions into user-friendly tools. Unlike Natalie's superficial interests, Olivia challenged Daniel intellectually, her insights forcing him to reconsider basic assumptions about business and technology. Glenn continued feeding them information about TransGlobal's declining service quality. His latest report detailed a major security breach in their outsourced IT system, exactly the kind of vulnerability Logitech was designed to prevent. Their first break came through Glenn's connection to Regional Retail Solutions, a mid-sized chain frustrated with TransGlobal's performance. Sarah Chun, RRS's operations director, agreed to meet them after another failed delivery nearly cost them a major contract. Their delivery times are worse than ever, Sarah complained during their presentation. Richard Whitaker keeps talking about modernization, but nothing improves. Last week, they lost an entire shipment of perishable goods because their tracking system failed. Daniel laid out Logitech's prototype. It will reduce your logistics costs by 40% in 3 months, or the trial period is free. Our system adapts to your existing workflows instead of forcing your people to change how they work. 40%? Sarah looked skeptical. TransGlobal promised 20 and delivered nothing. TransGlobal is running on outdated systems and corner cutting, Daniel replied. We built Logitech from scratch, specifically for companies like yours. Give us 3 months. If we fail, you lose nothing. 2 months later, RRS's logistics costs had dropped by 35%. By month 3, they'd exceeded their promised 40% reduction. More importantly, their employee satisfaction scores had improved dramatically. "This is revolutionary," Sarah told him, signing the full contract. "How did you achieve this?" Daniel thought of endless nights of coding, of Melissa's technical brilliance and Olivia's psychological insights. By understanding that technology should serve people, not the other way around, the success brought other clients. Each implementation proved smoother than the last as they refined their system. Daniel hired carefully, building a team that shared their vision of excellence without compromise. Olivia's role evolved beyond consulting. She joined their coffee runs and late-night strategy sessions, her presence bringing warmth to discussions that might otherwise have drowned in technical details. Unlike Natalie's demands for attention, Olivia offered quiet support and brilliant insights in equal measure. One evening, after a particularly successful client meeting, Melissa cornered Daniel in the office kitchen. "You know she's not going to wait forever, right?" "Who?" Daniel focused on making coffee. "Don't play dumb. Olivia. I see how you look at her when you think no one's watching." Melissa leaned against the counter. "Look, I get it. Your ex-wife did a number on you. But Olivia's different. She sees you for who you are, not what you can give her." "We're colleagues," Daniel replied automatically. "Right." Melissa rolled her eyes. "Because all colleagues spend every weekend together reviewing data. Just don't wait too long. Good things shouldn't be taken for granted." 5 years after the divorce, Logitech Solutions had become the industry's rising star. Their client list included major retailers and manufacturing firms, many poached directly from TransGlobal's declining empire. Daniel sat in their new downtown office, reviewing the latest acquisition report. Marcus Wheeler's largest client had just signed with Logitech, citing TransGlobal's deteriorating service quality. The irony wasn't lost on him. The same beach house that had hosted his wife's affair was now probably hosting Marcus's panic attacks about losing clients. His phone buzzed with a message from Catherine. "Danny, please call me. I didn't understand what Natalie was really like. The girls miss you. Family should stick together." Daniel drafted a short reply. "Understanding seems to come easier with success. Please don't contact me again." A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Olivia entered, carrying fresh coffee and a stack of research papers. "Our latest user interface study results are in. The adaptive learning algorithms are showing a 98% satisfaction rate. Better than expected." Daniel accepted the coffee, their fingers brushing briefly. "Your research on corporate psychology transformed our system." The system was already brilliant, Olivia said, settling into what had become her usual chair. "I just helped make it more human." She paused, studying him. "I saw Catherine's message on your phone." "Old habits dying hard," Daniel said. "Success makes people reconsider their choices. Does it make you reconsider yours?" Daniel met her gaze. "Every choice I've made since the divorce has led me here. I wouldn't change any of them." They worked late again, reviewing implementation strategies for their newest clients. The office gradually emptied, leaving them alone with the city lights spread out below. "Move in with me," Daniel said quietly, watching Olivia analyze data flows. "You practically live at my apartment anyway, between late nights and weekend sessions." "Make it official." Olivia looked up, her expression serious. "Are you sure? We've never really talked about." "I'm sure." Daniel met her gaze steadily. "You've never tried to change me or demanded I become something I'm not. You challenge me to be better while accepting who I am. That's worth more than all the yachts and country club memberships in the world." A slow smile spread across Olivia's face. "In that case, yes. But we're getting a bigger apartment. Your current one is 90% white boards." 93%, Daniel corrected, drawing her close. Melissa measured. The next day, reviewing client contracts in their sunlit office, Daniel felt a peace he hadn't known in years. On his desk, next to implementation schedules and market analyses, sat a small photo of him with Olivia and Melissa at a tech conference. Real smiles, real achievements, real relationships built on mutual respect rather than social climbing. Glenn's latest report arrived that afternoon. TransGlobal's stock had dropped another 12%. Richard's cost-cutting measures were backfiring spectacularly, and major shareholders were asking uncomfortable questions. Several board members had reached out quietly about Logitech services. Daniel filed the report carefully away. The foundation was built, the pieces in place. Success wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about building something better than what he'd lost. The fact that each new client they took from TransGlobal pushed Richard Whittaker closer to the abyss was just a satisfying bonus. 8 years after the divorce that stripped him of everything, Daniel Conway stood in Logitech's executive suite, watching TransGlobal's stock price crater on the digital display. Another 12% drop in a single day, bringing the total collapse to 48% in 6 months. Richard Whittaker's modernization strategy had finally imploded. Glenn's weekly security report lay open on his desk, detailing TransGlobal's systematic collapse. Maintenance schedules stretched beyond safety limits, experienced staff replaced with undertrained temps, quality controls bypassed for quick profits. The empire Richard had gutted for short-term gains was crumbling under its own rot. "Mr. Conway?" His assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Marcus Wheeler's called 3 times this morning. He says it's urgent regarding the Johnson Manufacturing account." "I'm sure it is," Daniel replied smoothly. Johnson Manufacturing represented 30% of TransGlobal's East Coast revenue, the division Marcus had protected so zealously during the divorce. Melissa burst into his office, tablet in hand, her usual energy amplified by triumph. "Johnson Manufacturing just signed with us. Full contract, no negotiations. They're dumping TransGlobal completely." "Marcus must be thrilled," Daniel remarked dryly. "Any other good news?" "Better than good." Melissa pulled up a series of graphs. 5 more major clients are reviewing their contracts with TransGlobal. Richard's cost-cutting finally hit their breaking point. 3 shipments lost last week, 2 major safety violations, and their new automated system, if you can call it, that has a 90% error rate. Olivia entered with a thick research report. After 6 years together, they perfected their professional personal balance. At work, she was Dr. Blake, Logitech's chief research officer. At home, she was simply Olivia, the woman who'd helped him build something better than revenge. "My team finished analyzing TransGlobal's employee turnover data," she announced. 80% of their experienced staff left in the past 3 years. Richard replaced them with temp workers at a third of the salary. "And how's that working out for them?" "Their efficiency ratings are lower than when they used paper ledgers," Olivia replied, setting the report on his desk. "But that's not even the best part. Check their social media presence." Daniel opened his laptop, pulling up the familiar feeds. Natalie's Instagram, once a parade of luxury vacations and designer shopping sprees, had transformed dramatically. Gone were the yacht parties and private jet selfies. Her recent posts featured vague, inspirational quotes overlaid on sunset backgrounds. "True wealth lies within," and "sometimes life's greatest storms bring us where we need to be." "How philosophical," Olivia observed. "Amazing how inner peace becomes attractive when the credit cards stop working." A notification popped up: Lucy's latest attempt at influencer fame. His older daughter had posted a desperate pitch for a questionable diet tea. The post had garnered exactly 12 likes, down from the thousands she used to command when Richard's money funded her lifestyle. Emily's LinkedIn profile showed similar desperation. His younger daughter had at least finished college, but her dreams of walking into a C-suite position through Richard's connections had evaporated. Her work history showed a string of increasingly modest positions, each shorter than the last. Their trust fund was mostly TransGlobal stock, Melissa noted, scanning financial reports. Currently worth less than recycling material. Richard's been quietly selling his personal shares for months. The rats always know when to flee the ship. Daniel's phone buzzed another message from Catherine. His sister's attempts at reconciliation had increased with each drop in TransGlobal's stock price. "Danny, please," her voicemail pleaded. "The girls need you. Everything Richard promised, it was all lies. Their trust fund, their futures, you're their father." Daniel deleted the message without reply. On his desk, another report demanded attention. Logan Financial Group, one of TransGlobal's largest shareholders, was interested in discussing Logitech services. "Set up the meeting," he instructed Melissa, "and have legal prepare acquisition documents. When TransGlobal declares bankruptcy, I want first position on their assets." "Already done." Melissa's efficiency was legendary. Glenn sent over their complete internal audit. It's worse than we imagined. Richard's been falsifying reports to shareholders for years. Send everything to the SE, Daniel decided. Anonymously, through our usual channels. Let's ensure this implosion is thorough. Rain lashed against Logitech's windows on a gray Tuesday morning. Daniel reviewed quarterly projections while Olivia analyzed user interface data from their latest software update. Their comfortable routine was interrupted by his assistant's urgent call. Mr. Conway? Natalie Warren is here. With your daughters. Daniel met Olivia's eyes. They discussed this possibility, knowing Richard's downfall would eventually lead to this moment. Send them up? His voice betrayed nothing. They arrived looking like faded photographs of their former selves. Natalie's designer outfit, probably from the height of her affair days, showed subtle signs of wear. The twins, now 24, had lost their social media glossiness. Lucy's expensive makeup couldn't hide her stress, while Emily's business casual attire seemed chosen to project a competence she hadn't earned. Daniel. Natalie's attempt at her old sophistication fell flat. You're looking successful. 8 years does that. He remained seated behind his desk, Olivia a quiet presence beside him. Why are you here? Daddy. Lucy stepped forward, tears already forming. Her practice performance hadn't improved with age. We've changed. We miss you. Richard. Emily spoke more hesitantly, genuine discomfort in her voice. He lied about everything. The trust fund, his promises about our futures. He left us with nothing but debts, Natalie cut in. The house is being foreclosed. His creditors are calling constantly. We need help. Daniel's voice could have frozen hell. Like the help you gave during the divorce? Or the help you offered when you testified about my emotional unavailability? We were stupid kids, Emily said softly. We thought money meant everything. And now that the money's gone, you've discovered family values? Olivia's quiet observation made them flinch. Lucy tried another angle. Uncle Richard the first mean. Richard, he manipulated us. Made us think. No. Daniel's single word cut through her performance. Richard didn't make you do anything. You chose luxury over loyalty. You decided your father's love was worth less than a yacht and a spring break in Paris. We've changed, Lucy insisted, tears flowing freely now. Please, Daddy. We need you. Need me? Daniel stood slowly. 8 years ago, you taught me an invaluable lesson about character and worth. Today, I'm teaching one about consequences and respect. He pressed the intercom. Security, please escort these visitors out. Daniel, please. Natalie's desperation cracked her polished facade. Where are we supposed to go? That's not my concern. He turned to the window, dismissed them entirely. I suggest starting with minimum wage jobs. I hear character building begins at the bottom. After security led them out, Daniel remained at the window, watching the rain. Olivia's hand found his, understanding in her silence. You know what's ironic? He finally said. I used to worry about providing them the best of everything. Private school, extracurricular activities, summer camps. Now they'll learn what I knew at their age. Success comes from work, not handouts. They'll be better for it, Olivia agreed. Though I doubt they see that yet. Daniel turned from the window, taking in his office. His CEO plaque sat beside Olivia's framed research papers and their shared patents. Real achievements built on mutual respect and genuine partnership. I have a meeting with the board at 2, he said, checking his schedule. We should discuss the Logitech Foundation. Olivia smiled, understanding his direction. Scholarships for students from single-parent homes? Focusing on technology degrees, Daniel pulled up a draft proposal. Let's create opportunities for people who understand the value of work. The next month passed in a blur of triumph and justice. TransGlobal declared bankruptcy, their stock worthless. Logitech acquired their assets at a fraction of their value. Glenn Wynn, Daniel's one loyal friend from the old days, became regional director. Reports filtered in about the aftermath. Emily found work as a retail associate, learning humility between folding sweaters. Lucy's influencer dreams collapsed entirely, forcing her to start over as a waitress. Natalie, stripped of her social status, landed a receptionist position at a small firm. Richard Whittaker, the Harvard MBA who'd stolen Daniel's family with promises of luxury, faced SEC investigations and shareholder lawsuits. His golden parachute had dissolved with TransGlobal's stock. Through it all, Daniel and Olivia planned their wedding, a small affair focused on genuine connections rather than social display. No yachts, no country clubs, just real relationships and earned success. Sometimes, Olivia said one evening, reviewing scholarship applications, the best revenge is simply building something better than what you lost. Daniel looked at their shared life, the partnership built on mutual respect, the company revolutionizing an industry, the foundation creating opportunities for others. It was never about revenge, he realized. It was about proving them wrong about what matters. The epilogue wrote itself in decisions and consequences. While his former family learned hard lessons about self-reliance, Daniel and Olivia expanded their scholarship program. Each success story from a scholarship recipient felt like vindication of their values. The final poetic justice came in small moments. Natalie learning to make her own coffee instead of ordering assistants around. Lucy discovering that Instagram followers couldn't pay bills. Emily understanding that real success required more than connections. Daniel and Olivia celebrated not with luxury purchases, but by increasing their foundation's endowment. They turned past pain into future opportunities, proving that true success came from character, not currency. In the end, the greatest victory wasn't in watching his betrayers fall, but in building something meaningful from the ashes of their betrayal. The Logitech Foundation would outlast any revenge, creating ripples of opportunity long after the pain that spawned it had faded into history. Epilogue. A decade later, 10 years after that rainy day in his office, Daniel Conway stood at Logitech's newly expanded headquarters, now occupying the entire building where TransGlobal's offices once dominated the skyline. The company had grown beyond even his ambitious visions, revolutionizing not just logistics but entire supply chain management systems globally. Inside his office, photographs told the story of the past decade. His wedding to Olivia, an intimate ceremony in a botanical garden, with only genuine friends present. Melissa served as their witness, making sarcastic comments about finally making their nerd partnership official. The reception featured academic discussions about psychology and technology rather than social climbing. The Logitech Foundation's first graduation ceremony held particular pride of place 20 students from single-parent homes receiving their technology degrees, their faces bright with earned achievement. That program had grown to support over 200 students annually, creating a new generation of innovators who understood the value of hard work. Glenn Wynn, now Logitech's Global Operations Director, had transformed their acquired TransGlobal assets into models of efficiency. He took particular satisfaction in implementing the very systems Richard had once dismissed as unnecessary complications. News about his former family arrived sporadically, each update confirming the wisdom of his decisions. Natalie's fall had been particularly steep. After her receptionist position, she had cycled through increasingly modest jobs, her lack of practical skills and entitled attitude making it difficult to maintain employment. Her last known position was as a part-time filing clerk in a small law firm, the same one that had handled her divorce from Richard. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Richard Whittaker's descent proved even more dramatic. The SEC investigation into TransGlobal's collapse revealed years of fraudulent reporting and misappropriated funds. His Harvard MBA couldn't save him from federal charges. He served 3 years in a minimum security prison, emerging without his fortune, connections, or the arrogance that had once defined him. Now he taught basic business classes at a community college, his cautionary tale serving as his only remaining asset. The twins had taken different paths through their hardships. Emily, after 2 years in retail, had finally embraced genuine hard work. She returned to school, paying her own way through a teaching degree, and now worked with underprivileged children. The experience of losing everything had transformed her into someone who understood the value of character over currency. Lucy's journey proved longer and harder. Her attempts to maintain her influencer lifestyle led to increasingly desperate choices, including a brief, disastrous marriage to an aging real estate developer who proved to be as bankrupt as her former stepfather. Rock bottom came in the form of a viral video showing her berating a barista over an incorrectly made latte. Her Karen moment as social media dubbed it, finally shattered her carefully curated online persona. Catherine's attempts at reconciliation continued sporadically, usually coinciding with her need for business connections or social advancement. Each message went unanswered, each holiday card returned unopened. The sister who had chosen social climbing over family loyalty remained firmly in the past. Marcus Wheeler's career never recovered from Transglobal's collapse. His attempts to join Logitech through back channels met with polite but firm rejections. The beach house where Natalie's affair had begun was sold to cover his debts. He now worked as a mid-level manager at a regional shipping company, his dreams of executive status as dead as his friendship with Daniel. Melissa had remained a cornerstone of Logitech's success, her brilliant coding and brutal honesty helping drive the company's innovation. She turned down numerous offers from Silicon Valley, stating that building something real beats creating another app for sharing cat photos. Her partnership with Olivia in developing user-friendly interfaces had created a new standard in enterprise software design. Olivia's research on corporate psychology had earned her international recognition. The Blake model of adaptive organizational systems was now taught in business schools including, deliciously, at Harvard Business School, where Richard once boasted of his MBA. She split her time between Logitech and guest lecturing, helping shape a new generation of business leaders who understood that true success came from building people up rather than climbing over them. Daniel and Olivia's relationship deepened with each passing year, their partnership proving that professional success and personal happiness could coexist when built on mutual respect and shared values. They traveled extensively, not to show off on social media like Natalie once did, but to meet with foundation scholars and explore new ideas for expanding their impact. The Logitech Foundation had become their legacy, transforming lives beyond mere business success. Each year, they received letters from scholarship recipients sharing their achievements. Startups launched, innovations created, communities improved. These stories meant more than any revenge could have provided. One morning, reviewing applications for the next round of scholarships, Daniel found a familiar name. Lucy's daughter, Angela, now being raised by a single mother working as a waitress. The application was honest about their circumstances and demonstrated a genuine understanding of hard work's value. After careful consideration, Daniel approved the scholarship, not out of sentimentality or forgiveness, but because the foundation's mission was to help those who understood the price of success. Angela would never know her grandfather had ensured she would have the chance to earn, not be given, a better future. The final irony came when Harvard Business School invited Daniel to give a guest lecture on ethical business leadership. Standing at the podium where Richard had once learned his shallow lessons about success, Daniel shared the real secret of achieving greatness: character, commitment, and the courage to build something meaningful from life's hardest moments. In the end, the greatest victory wasn't the fall of those who had betrayed him, but the rise of something better from the ashes of that betrayal. Logitech, the foundation, his marriage to Olivia all stood as testaments to the truth that real success comes not from what you take, but from what you build. The wheel of karma had turned full circle, teaching lessons about character and consequences that no amount of money could buy. In the quiet moments between triumphs, Daniel and Olivia would sometimes reflect on how destruction had led to creation, and how the best revenge truly was living well not for spite, but for the sake of building something worthwhile.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
I felt the tears welling up, but fought to hold them back. But we have history, I protested. 3 years, Ben. All those memories, all our plans. Hey there, I'm Kathy, I thought, remembering the day Ben first kissed me behind the bleachers after football practice. The metal was cold against my back, but his Letterman jacket kept me warm. His hands trembled slightly as he cupped my face, and I could smell the fresh-cut grass lingering on his practice clothes. That was 3 years ago, a time when everything felt new and exciting. Now, at 20, I catch myself staring at my phone more than I actually look at him when we're together. Our routine has become just that, routine. Friday nights used to be filled with adventure, driving around in his beat-up Corolla, sharing fries at the 24-hour diner on 5th Street, and making out in empty parking lots. These days, we sit in silence at his parents' house, the TV droning in the background while we both scroll through our phones. Even our kisses felt mechanical, like we were just going through the motions of what we thought we should be doing. Last weekend, I met Sarah for coffee at our usual spot downtown. The cafe was buzzing with the typical Saturday morning crowd, and the smell of fresh pastries filled the air. The barista knew our orders by heart. A vanilla latte for me and an Americano for Sarah. I stirred my drink absently while telling her how Ben and I barely talked anymore, how movie nights had turned into silent scrolling sessions. Maybe you need to spice things up, Sarah suggested, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her cup. Have you ever thought about, opening up your relationship? I nearly choked on my drink. Like, seeing other people? Yeah, but ethically. You both agree to it, set boundaries. It's not cheating if everyone's honest. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. My cousin tried it with her boyfriend. She said it made them appreciate each other more. The idea planted itself in my mind and wouldn't leave. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by photos of Ben and me at proms and football games, I scrolled through articles about open relationships until my eyes hurt. It made perfect sense. We could explore and grow while still having each other as anchors. We wouldn't have to throw away 3 years of history just because we were curious about what else was out there. It took me a week to convince Ben. Every time we met, I brought it up casually, like dropping little seeds of possibility during lunch at our campus cafe, between classes in the crowded hallways, or curled up on his parents' couch. Think about it, I'd say, watching his face carefully. We're only 20. Shouldn't we experience more before settling down completely? He'd shake his head, those warm brown eyes clouding with worry, but I kept pushing, painting pictures of adventure and freedom. We'd still be us, I assured him over pizza at Mario's, our favorite joint since sophomore year. This could make us stronger. We'd know we chose each other over everyone else. Finally, last night, he agreed. We were sitting in his car outside my apartment, the streetlight casting shadows across his face. The same face I had memorized years ago, but somehow it looked different now. If this is what you really want, he said quietly, his fingers nervously drumming on the steering wheel. I leaned over and kissed him, feeling relief and excitement bubble in my chest. It'll be perfect, I promised. You'll see. Looking back now, I wonder if I saw the doubt in his eyes and simply chose to ignore it. Perhaps I was too caught up in the allure of something new to realize that I might be breaking something that didn't need fixing. Let's check the story from Ben's side. The weight of her idea pressed down on me, like an unexpected exam I hadn't studied for. I could feel the anxiety creeping in, uncertainty swirling in my stomach. We were only 20, and the thought of exploring outside our relationship felt daunting. It wasn't that I thought Kathy was wrong for wanting something different. I just didn't know if I was ready to navigate that territory. During dinner, while we picked at our food, her excitement was palpable. She painted vivid pictures of how freeing it would be, how it could strengthen us. I wanted to be supportive, but deep down, I felt a knot tightening in my chest. This was unfamiliar ground, and I feared we might lose ourselves in the process. But she was persistent, coaxing me to see things her way, pushing the envelope further each time. Finally, last night, when we sat in my car outside her apartment, I caved. If this is what you really want, I said, trying to mask my apprehension. She leaned in and kissed me, her excitement flooding the space between us. I could see it in her eyes, the thrill of the new, the unknown. Looking back, I wonder if I caught a glimpse of doubt in my own gaze, but chose to ignore it, swept up in her enthusiasm. Maybe I was too focused on keeping us together to realize that I was about to gamble on something precious that didn't really need fixing. Think about it logically, she'd insist, adopting that familiar tone she uses when trying to persuade me, the same one she had when she convinced me to sneak into that midnight horror movie back in junior year. We're too young to limit ourselves. Don't you want to know what else is out there? But the truth was, I didn't want to know. I was content with our Friday movie nights, the little quirks that made us, like how she takes her coffee, vanilla creamer, no sugar, and how she always forgets to return my hoodies. I didn't crave anything beyond that. The mere thought of her being with someone else twisted my stomach into knots. I voiced my concerns to my buddy Mike while we shot hoops in his driveway, the thud of the ball against the concrete echoing like a countdown. This was the same hoop where we practiced for tryouts in freshman year, and it was here that I first admitted to him I was falling for Kathy. Man, that's how relationships end, Mike said, missing a three-pointer. Once you open that door, you can't close it. The ball rolled into the grass, forgotten, as he launched into cautionary tales about his cousin's disastrous open relationship attempt. But all I could focus on was how Kathy's eyes sparkled with excitement when she talked about this new possibility, a brightness that hadn't been there in months when she looked at me. My parents sensed something was off. My mom asked if we'd had a fight when I barely touched my dinner for 3 nights in a row. Dad tried to offer relationship advice during our weekend car maintenance session, but how do you explain to your father that your high school sweetheart wants to date other people? Each time Kathy brought it up, my resolve chipped away a little more. It felt like watching a crack spread across a windshield. Slow at first, but then suddenly overwhelming. Her argument began to make a twisted sort of sense, or maybe I just grew weary of the fight. Last night, I finally caved in. We were parked outside her place, the same spot where I had first confessed my love for her 2 years ago. She looked at me with those big green eyes that had gotten me in trouble back in high school, the streetlight catching the tiny gold flecks shimmering in them. "Okay," I said, the word feeling heavy in my mouth. "If this is what you want." She smiled as if I had given her the best gift ever. But all I could think about was how different everything would be now. As I watched her walk to her door, memories of our first date at the carnival sophomore year flooded back. I remembered how nervous I had been to hold her hand on the Ferris wheel. Now, I was agreeing to let her date other guys, and that made me more anxious than any carnival ride ever could. Later that night, lying in bed, I stared at our prom picture on the nightstand. Her in that blue dress that perfectly matched my tie, both of us grinning like we had the whole world figured out. I couldn't shake the feeling that this might be the beginning of the end, and I wondered if I was simply too afraid of losing her to admit it. Let's check the story Kathy's side. Dating Tom from accounting began quite simply. Coffee breaks evolved into lunch dates, and before long, we were meeting after work. He had that corporate charm, crisp shirts, a perfect haircut, and expensive cologne. At first, everything felt thrilling, like I was living in my own romance novel. No history, no expectations, just pure attraction. Our first kiss took place in the parking garage after work, and it was a world away from kissing Ben. Tom exuded confidence, his moves practiced and smooth. I felt sophisticated and worldly. When he invited me to his apartment, things escalated quickly, like a movie on fast forward. The sex was technically perfect, but afterward, as I lay in his expensive sheets, I felt an unexpected emptiness. That's when I started to miss Ben's little quirks, like the way he absent-mindedly played with my hair while we watched TV, how he remembers to order extra pickles for me, even though he hates them, and the unique sound of his laugh when he's genuinely happy. Tom never laughs like that. Everything about him feels calculated. Just last week, during dinner with Tom, I found myself checking my phone, hoping to see Ben's name pop up. The restaurant was fancy, the kind of place Ben and I would only visit for special occasions, where we joke about the tiny portions and the unpronounceable menu items. With Tom, it felt more like a business meeting with benefits. That's when I realized this experiment wasn't solving anything. Instead of feeling liberated, I felt lost. The initial thrill of something new had faded, revealing that what Ben and I had was truly special, needing only some care and attention. Yesterday, I finally summoned the courage to tell Ben I wanted to end the open relationship. I planned it meticulously, inviting him to our old spot by the lake, even donning his favorite sundress. The setting sun bathed everything in a golden hue, reminiscent of the romantic movies we used to enjoy together. "I think we should go back to being exclusive," I said, my heart racing with hope. His response felt like a punch to the gut. "I've just started enjoying it. I've been seeing Sarah Miller," he said quietly, "and Jessica from chemistry class, and Katie from our old Spanish club." Each name hit me like a wave, crashing over me. These were girls we both knew from high school, who had watched our relationship blossom, who had congratulated us at prom. With every name, it felt like a betrayal, each familiar face twisting the knife deeper. "They're not just hookups," he continued, his voice steady in a way that terrified me. "I'm actually connecting with them." I sat there, watching the sunset bleed into a blood-red sky, feeling like the biggest fool in the world. While I had been playing the role of a sophisticated adult with Tom, Ben had been forging genuine connections with girls who knew our history and shared our past. The jealousy crashed over me like a tidal wave, threatening to drown me. All those nights I had imagined him home, pining for me, he had been out discovering he could be happy without me. The realization made me feel physically ill. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He was meant to be waiting for my return, not thriving without me. Let's check the story from Ben's side. When Kathy first suggested opening our relationship, I never imagined I would be the one to embrace it. The initial days were tough. I spent most of my time at home, consumed by thoughts of her with other guys. Then Sarah Miller reached out to me on Instagram, asking if I wanted to grab coffee and catch up. I almost declined. Sarah had been part of our extended friend group since sophomore year, sharing all our high school memories, but something compelled me to say yes. Maybe it was loneliness, or perhaps curiosity. We met at the old diner where Kathy and I used to hang out. Sarah seemed different from my memories of her, more confident, funnier. We ended up talking for hours about everything and nothing at all. She remembered details about my life that even Kathy had forgotten. My dream of opening a classic car restoration shop, my collection of vintage vinyl records. When she kissed me in the parking lot, it felt unexpectedly right. Then Jessica from chemistry class came into the picture. We bumped into each other at the campus library, and suddenly those study sessions I once had with Kathy took on a new energy. Jessica shares my enthusiasm for those obscure sci-fi books I adore, which Kathy always found dull. Then there was Katie from Spanish Club. We reconnected at a mutual friends party, and she suggested we practice our Spanish together. Our study sessions usually end up being more in English than Spanish, but in those conversations, I've learned more about myself than I have in years. Each of these new connections has taught me something different about who I am. With Sarah, I've rediscovered my old passions. Jessica encourages me to embrace my nerdy interests without shame, while Katie listens to me in a way I had forgotten was even possible. I've started working out again, joined a local car restoration club, and picked up my guitar from the basement. The guy in the mirror looks different now, stronger, more confident. The shy boy who used to let Kathy make all the decisions is gone. When she asked to meet at the lake yesterday, wearing that sundress I used to adore, I knew what was coming. The old Ben would have jumped at the chance to return to our comfortable routine, but that's not who I am anymore. I could see the hurt in her eyes when I mentioned Sarah, Jessica, and Katie. The shock that registered when she realized I wasn't just biding my time until she came back hit me hard. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to slip back into our familiar patterns, but I've grown too much to pretend. These aren't just casual flings. They're real connections with people who appreciate me for who I am now, not who I was in high school. The freedom Kathy sought has transformed into something I never anticipated needing, but now I can't imagine living without it. Let's check Kathy's side now. I knew what I had with Ben. I always thought it would be there, waiting for me like a safety net while I explored other options. I never imagined he would be the one to outgrow me. Last night, I made one final attempt to salvage what we had. I invited him to my apartment, the place where we used to spend countless evenings dreaming about our future. I cleaned obsessively all day, arranged everything just the way he liked it, and even cooked his favorite pasta, the only recipe I ever really perfected. The familiar scent of garlic and basil filled the air, a desperate effort to recreate what we once had. When he arrived, he looked different, confident, relaxed. The nervous energy that used to radiate from him was gone. He wore a new jacket I didn't recognize, and his hair was styled in a way that made him seem more mature. Seeing him standing in my doorway, so familiar yet so changed, made my heart ache. I've been thinking, I started, my rehearsed speech suddenly feeling childish. We made a mistake with this whole open relationship thing. We could go back to how things were and make it work better this time. I'll be more present, more appreciative. We could start fresh. Ben didn't sit down when I offered. Instead, he leaned against the kitchen counter. A subtle but clear message that he wasn't planning to stay long. The pasta grew cold on the stove as he spoke. Kathy, he said, his voice gentle but firm, you were right about one thing. We didn't need to grow, but you were wrong about us needing to come back to each other. I've discovered parts of myself I never knew existed. Sarah, Jessica, Katie, they're not just distractions. They've helped me understand what I want in life, what kind of relationship I need. I felt the tears welling up, but forced them back. But we have history, I protested. 3 years, Ben. All those memories, all our plans. History isn't a good enough reason to go backward, he replied. You taught me that, actually. When you pushed for this open relationship, you showed me that sometimes we need to let go of what's comfortable to find what's right. The irony of my own words being turned against me hit hard. I watched as he straightened up, preparing to leave. This wasn't my Ben anymore. The boy who used to agree with everything I suggested, who would have done anything to keep me happy. This was someone new, someone I had inadvertently helped create. I'm planning on seeing Sarah exclusively now, he continued, his voice steady. It wouldn't be fair to her, or to you, to pretend I can go back. Maybe it's best we stop seeing each other completely. Give ourselves a clean break. The pasta sat untouched as he walked to the door. I wanted to run after him, to remind him of every moment we'd shared, every promise we'd made. But his straight shoulders and confident stride told me it would be useless. The boy who used to melt at my touch was gone, replaced by a man who knew exactly what he wanted. And it wasn't me. After he left, I sat alone in my kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of my failed attempt to recapture the past. The photos on my fridge mocked me, those younger versions of us smiling, blissfully unaware of how thoroughly I would destroy what we had. I took them down one by one, each memory stinging like salt in a fresh wound. The worst part isn't losing Ben. It's knowing that I orchestrated this entire disaster. I pushed for an open relationship, convinced it would solve our problems. Instead, it solved things, just not in the way I'd intended. He found his voice, his confidence, his independence, and I found myself alone, holding the remains of a relationship I dismantled with my own hands. They say be careful what you wish for. I wished for freedom, for excitement, for change. I got all three, just not the way I wanted. Now, sitting in my empty apartment with cold pasta and fallen tears, I realize some changes can't be undone. Some doors can't be closed once opened. And sometimes, the person who suggests playing with fire is the one who gets burned the worst. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
I'm a construction foreman. My job isn't glamorous, but it's solid work that pays the bills and keeps me grounded. It's the kind of work that's straightforward, you put in the effort, and you see the results. My wife, on the other hand, has a more creative job as a graphic designer. It's not a field I fully understand, but I respect it. She often jokes about how we're opposites in our work lives, her in the world of color and creativity, and me in the world of measurements and deadlines. That balance, I've always thought, worked for us. It kept things interesting without stepping on each other's toes. One evening, we had plans to meet some friends at a bar we all liked. It wasn't a flashy place, but it had a charm of its own. Nestled in a small alleyway, the bar was an open-air setup with string lights hanging overhead and a relaxed atmosphere that made it a favorite for our group. My wife and I ended up running late that night. She's always got one more thing to finish before we leave, and I've gotten used to waiting. By the time we arrived, the group was already deep in a heated discussion. As soon as we got there, I could tell something serious was being debated. I asked what was going on, and someone explained that one of our mutual friends, a woman I didn't know well but had seen around, had decided to try an open relationship. That sparked a strong debate within the group. The room seemed split between those who thought it was progressive and those who thought it was nonsense. Naturally, I had no problem stating my opinion. To me, the whole idea seemed ridiculous. I made it clear that I believed open relationships were just a fancy way to dress up infidelity. It didn't matter how anyone tried to justify it, sharing your partner with someone else was crossing a line in my book. Some people nodded in agreement, but others, including my wife, took a softer stance. She didn't outright defend the friend but suggested that people should be free to make their own choices without judgment. That irked me a little. It felt like she was trying to justify something I saw as fundamentally wrong. The conversation went back and forth for a while. Everyone had their say, and the mood shifted between serious and light-hearted. Eventually, someone changed the subject, and the tension eased. It wasn't worth fighting over all night, but I couldn't help wondering what my wife really thought about it. She's usually on the same page with me about big things, so seeing her take a more neutral stance was something I tucked away in the back of my mind. As the evening wore on, the topic shifted to work. Since most of the group were friends from my wife's job, they started talking about an upcoming company event. Apparently, her department was hosting a corporate party, and they'd invited people from nearby departments as well. I wasn't thrilled about the idea. Her company's office culture had never sat well with me. Without naming names, let's just say that some of their attitudes and values didn't align with mine. It wasn't long before people started heading home. I asked my wife if she planned to attend the corporate party, hoping she'd say no. I wasn't keen on her being around those people, especially the ones from the other departments. I didn't trust them, and I've always been protective of her, maybe more than she'd like. She's independent, sure, but I've got my boundaries, and I don't think that's a bad thing. To my surprise, she said she wanted to go. She explained that she was excited to meet new people and learn more about the other teams. It'll be fun, she said. I didn't push back at the moment, but something about it didn't sit right with me. For now, I decided to let it go, but in the back of my mind, I knew this wasn't the end of the conversation. Later that evening, when we got home, I decided to bring up the earlier conversation from the bar. It wasn't something I could just let slide without asking about. As we settled in, I asked her why she defended that friend. Do you really think open relationships make any sense? Or do you think she's just trying to justify cheating? Maybe her boyfriend is too weak to stand up for himself, I said. I wasn't trying to pick a fight, but I wanted an honest answer. She looked at me calmly and shrugged. I wouldn't try it myself, she said, but it's not about us, is it? Some people live like that. If you hear about it so often, it must be popular in certain circles. Maybe it works for them. Her tone was neutral, almost dismissive, but her words didn't sit well with me. I'm not the type to overthink things, but I couldn't help wondering why she'd even entertain the idea as something valid. But don't get me wrong, she added quickly, probably noticing the look on my face. I'm not saying I agree with it. I'm just saying it's out there. And sure, it probably feels freeing for some people to have that kind of arrangement while still being close to someone. But again, that's not for me. Don't start overthinking this, okay? Her words were clear, but something about the way she spoke felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I decided not to press further. Sometimes it's better to let things rest. All right, I said, leaning back on the couch. As long as you're not seriously considering it, I'm fine. It just seems like a messy way to live. I tried to push the topic out of my head, but it lingered in the background. I've always been straightforward, and the concept of complicating relationships like that didn't make sense to me. Still, I took her at her word and decided to move on. After a pause, she changed the subject. By the way, she started, do you remember my sister from Austria? It took me a second to place her. We hadn't seen each other in years, but I nodded. She's coming to visit next week, she continued. She'll probably stay for about a week or so. It'll be nice to have her here for a bit. That caught me off guard. Her sister and I had never been particularly close. Not because of any bad blood, but just because we'd never had much reason to interact. What's bringing her here? I asked. Is it just a casual visit, or is something going on? She's dealing with some issues back home with her parents, my wife explained. She didn't get into the details, but it sounds like she needs a break. She'll be staying with us for a while to clear her head. And I'd appreciate it if you didn't pry too much. She'll talk about it if she feels like it. Her tone was firm but kind, and I could tell she wanted me to let the matter be. I shrugged. All right, that's fine. If she needs a place to stay and you're okay with it, I'm okay with it too. We'll make it work. I didn't mind having a guest in the house, as long as it didn't turn into some long-term arrangement. For now, though, I had no reason to push back, so I let the conversation end there. The night of the corporate event arrived, and my wife was getting ready with her usual attention to detail. I watched her from the couch, scrolling through my phone. Before she left, I told her, make sure to check in with me, all right? At least a quick text every hour or so. She rolled her eyes but smiled. Sure, I'll let you know how it's going, she said, giving me a quick peck on the cheek before heading out the door. I wasn't thrilled about the event, but I trusted her to stick to her word. After she left, I settled in with my phone. As I scrolled through a group chat with some of the guys, a familiar name popped up. They were talking about that woman who had decided to try an open relationship. Turns out, she worked in one of the departments involved in tonight's corporate event. The chat was buzzing with opinions, and most of them weren't flattering. Words like justifying cheating and attention seeker were thrown around. It didn't surprise me. Her reputation wasn't exactly stellar, and people didn't hold back when it came to sharing their thoughts. Reading those messages made me think about my wife being at the same event. I couldn't help but wonder if she'd end up talking to that woman. Not that I'd expect anything to come of it, but the idea of her mingling with people I didn't trust didn't sit well with me. I shook it off, reminding myself that she said she'd check in. That would be enough to keep my mind at ease, or so I thought. An hour passed, then another. I realized I hadn't heard from her. I glanced at my phone, expecting to see a message, but there was nothing. I decided to call her. The phone rang a few times before going to voicemail. That's when the irritation started creeping in. She'd promised to keep in touch, and now she wasn't picking up. I tried to convince myself that she was probably busy or had left her phone in her bag. Still, it didn't do much to calm my nerves. Figuring there was no point in sitting around stewing, I called a few friends and invited them over to watch the game. If she wasn't going to check in, I might as well enjoy the evening. The guy showed up, and for a while, I was able to push the situation out of my mind. We watched the game, cracked open a few beers, and talked about everything except my wife's silence. But even after they left, the house felt empty, and the clock kept ticking. By now, it was late. Too late for someone who said they'd keep me updated. My patience was running thin, and I started pacing around the living room. Just as I was about to call her again, I heard the front door open. She walked in, looking surprisingly composed. "You're late," I said, my voice edged with frustration. She didn't seem fazed. "I know." "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "We met some great people tonight. A few of them are new to the city, so we decided to show them around a bit. That's why I lost track of time." Her explanation was calm and matter-of-fact, but it didn't erase my irritation. At least she wasn't drunk, which was something I'd half expected. "Look, I'll tell you all about it tomorrow," she added, clearly trying to wind down the conversation. She gave me a quick kiss goodnight before heading upstairs. Reluctantly, I followed. I had plenty of questions, but they would have to wait. For now, we both went to bed, and I tried to push the evening out of my mind. The next morning, as we sat at the kitchen table with coffee in hand, I decided to ask her about the previous night. "Why didn't you pick up when I called?" I said, trying to keep my tone calm but firm. She looked up from her mug, slightly startled but not defensive. "Oh, that," she said. "I'm sorry. My phone was in my bag the whole time. I didn't hear it ring." She shrugged like it wasn't a big deal. "We were just walking around, talking. It wasn't anything crazy." Her explanation didn't fully satisfy me, but I decided to hear her out. "And who were you with, exactly?" I pressed. She set her cup down and started explaining. "I actually met that woman everyone's been talking about," she said, referring to the one who had opened her relationship. "She's not at all like the rumors make her out to be." She told me the whole story, and apparently, it was her boyfriend's idea in the first place. They both agreed to it, so it's not like she's just out there cheating. I frowned. "You know the guys and I were talking about her too, right? We've heard she's been with half the office, and there's plenty of proof to back it up." She shook her head, looking unimpressed. "That's all nonsense," she said firmly. "People love to exaggerate and spread rumors." She seemed genuine to me, not like some drama queen trying to justify bad behavior. Honestly, I think she's just misunderstood. Her defense of this woman irritated me. "I don't think you should be hanging around her," I said plainly. "People like that have a way of pulling others into their mess, even if it's unintentional." She rolled her eyes, and I could tell she was getting annoyed. "That's ridiculous," she snapped. "If I wanted to pull something like that, as you put it, I would have done it a long time ago. But I haven't, because I don't want to. Can you trust me on that?" Her irritation was starting to wear on me, but I decided to back off. "Fine," I said, waving a hand dismissively. "Just be careful. People like that can influence you without you even realizing it. That's all I'm saying." She didn't respond, instead taking another sip of her coffee and staring out the window. It was clear we weren't going to agree on this one. Before the tension could linger, she changed the subject. "Anyway," she said, "my sister is coming tomorrow." That caught my attention. "Already?" I asked. "I thought we had more time to get things ready." She shook her head. Nope, she'll be here tomorrow. So, we need to make sure the guest room is sorted and everything looks nice. I sighed, mentally running through the list of things that needed to be done. It wasn't a huge task, but it wasn't nothing either. All right, I said. Let's get it done tonight. I'll take care of the heavy lifting. She nodded, seemingly relieved that the conversation had shifted to something more practical. With that, the mood lightened slightly. We finished our coffee and started planning the rest of the day, focusing on getting the house ready for her sister's arrival. As much as the earlier conversation lingered in my mind, I decided to let it go for now. There were more pressing things to take care of, and the last thing I needed was another argument before her sister even got here. Her sister arrived the next day, just as my wife had said. As soon as she walked through the door, there was a flurry of hugs and greetings. I stood to the side for a moment, letting the two of them have their reunion before stepping in to say hello. Her sister looked tired but relieved, and I could tell that being here meant a lot to her. After the initial excitement settled, we all moved to the dining table, where my wife had already set out some snacks and coffee. While my wife and her sister caught up, I helped bring her luggage upstairs to the guest room. Once everything was set down, I asked her if she needed anything else. She shook her head and said, "No, this is perfect. Thank you." We started chatting casually as she unpacked, and that's when she brought it up herself. "I really appreciate you letting me stay here for a while," she said, her tone sincere. "It's been tough lately with my parents." I paused for a moment before replying. "If you don't mind me asking, what happened?" I figured that if she was opening the door to this topic, it wouldn't hurt to ask. She sighed, sitting down on the edge of the bed. "It's not a secret," she said. "I'm a lesbian. I came out to them recently, and they didn't take it well. Actually, they didn't take it at all. It turned into a massive argument, and things have been pretty bad ever since. I needed some space to clear my head, so I decided to come here." I nodded, taking it all in. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. "But for what it's worth, you're welcome here for as long as you need. Family's supposed to have your back, even when they don't agree with everything." She smiled faintly and said, "Thanks. That means a lot." It wasn't much, but I could tell it helped to hear someone say it. When we came back downstairs, my wife was already making plans. "I was thinking," she said, "we could spend some time exploring the city. I have this new friend who knows all the best spots. She's been raving about this little coffee shop and some great local markets. It'll be fun." Her sister seemed excited about the idea, and I didn't see any harm in it, so I just nodded along. They deserved some time to relax, especially after everything her sister had been through. Not long after, my phone buzzed. It was my father. "We've got a problem with the shed," he said, sounding stressed. "The structure's giving out, and it's about to collapse on the fence. I need your help to take it down before it causes more damage." I sighed, knowing this wasn't something I could put off. When my dad called for help, it was always urgent. I explained the situation to my wife and her sister. "Looks like I'll be heading out to help my dad," I said. "You two go ahead with your plans. Explore the city, have a good time. Just keep me posted on where you're going." My wife nodded, understanding the urgency. "Of course," she said. "We'll manage. Don't worry about us." It wasn't how I'd planned to spend the day, but priorities are priorities. I grabbed my things, gave my wife a quick kiss, and headed out the door. As I left, I glanced back to see the two of them chatting animatedly about their itinerary. It was good to see her sister smiling again, even if it meant I'd miss out on the day with them. After hours of hard work helping my father dismantle the shed, I was exhausted but satisfied with the progress we'd made. The structure had been a disaster waiting to happen, and while we hadn't finished the job entirely, we'd at least managed to stabilize things and prevent any immediate damage. It was one of those days where physical labor cleared my mind, and I was looking forward to heading home, taking a shower, and relaxing. When I walked through the door, however, my plans for a quiet evening vanished immediately. Sitting in the living room were my wife, her sister, and two guests I recognized instantly, my wife's new friend and her boyfriend. The pair struck an odd image. Their clothes were flashy, almost costume-like, and their whole vibe screamed attention seekers. I nodded a polite hello, though inwardly I was already bracing myself for what was to come. I joined them in the living room, grabbing a drink from the kitchen on the way. The atmosphere was casual, but it didn't take long before the conversation shifted into familiar territory. The friend and her boyfriend were once again singing the praises of open relationships, going on about how freeing and transformative they were. They spoke with a missionary zeal, as if trying to convert everyone in the room to their way of thinking. I listened for a while, trying to keep my patience. Eventually, I'd had enough. "Look," I said, cutting into their monologue. "You can talk it up all you want, but to me, it's just an excuse for people who can't commit. Relationships aren't supposed to be a free-for-all. If you can't stick with one person, maybe you shouldn't be in a relationship at all." My tone was firm but calm, though I could see their expressions change immediately. The boyfriend shot back, "That's such a closed-minded way of looking at it. People are different, and relationships don't have to fit into some outdated mold. Maybe you should try thinking outside the box." His condescension grated on me, but I stayed composed. "Thinking outside the box doesn't mean throwing away basic respect and commitment," I replied. "If you want to live your life that way, fine, but don't act like it's some universal truth everyone else should follow." The argument escalated quickly from there. Voices were raised, points were repeated, and the tension in the room became unbearable. My wife and her sister tried to mediate, but it was clear that this wasn't going to end with anyone changing their minds. Eventually, the couple stood up, clearly frustrated. "Well, it's obvious you're not ready to have an open mind about this," the friend said, grabbing her bag. "Thanks for the evening, but we'll be going now." Her boyfriend followed suit, and just like that, they were gone. As the door closed behind them, I felt a mix of relief and lingering frustration. Before I could even sit down, my wife pulled me aside. "What was that?" she demanded, her voice low but sharp. "Why couldn't you just let it go? You didn't have to turn it into a fight." I looked at her, trying to keep my own temper in check. "I'm not going to sit here and listen to that nonsense without saying something," I said. "If they can't handle a different opinion, that's their problem, not mine." She sighed, clearly exasperated. "It's not about agreeing with them," she said. "It's about keeping the peace. Now they're upset, and honestly, I'm upset too. You can't just banish everyone who doesn't think exactly like you." Her words stung, but I stood my ground. "I'm not banishing anyone," I said. "But I am saying I don't want you hanging around people like that. They're a bad influence, and you know it. The company you keep matters, whether you like it or not." That was the last straw for her. "You don't get to dictate who I'm friends with," she snapped. "I don't tell you who you can or can't spend time with, so don't try to control me." With that, she stormed off to the bedroom, leaving me standing there in the living room. I took a deep breath, realizing there was no point in continuing the argument tonight. Eventually, I followed her upstairs. Neither of us said another word as we got ready for bed, and the silence hung heavy between us as we turned out the lights and went to sleep. The morning started unusually quiet. When I woke up, the house was empty, which wasn't something I was used to. Normally, there was some movement, some noise from the kitchen, or at least a light on in the living room. Instead, I found only a note from my wife. It was short and to the point: "We went to the mall. Be back later." Though we obviously referred to her and her sister. I shrugged it off initially. It wasn't strange for them to spend time together, especially since her sister was visiting. As the hours passed, I waited for them to come back. When they finally arrived, it didn't take long to notice something was off. Her sister looked visibly upset. She wasn't crying or making a scene, but her mood was unmistakably low. I asked her if everything was all right, but she just waved me off with a faint smile and a mumbled "I'm fine." That might have been enough to convince someone else, but not me. Something was bothering her, and she wasn't saying what. This pattern repeated itself over the next few days. They would leave together, always giving vague explanations about where they were going, and return hours later. Every time, her sister's demeanor seemed worse. She became quieter, more withdrawn. I tried asking her again, but she gave me the same dismissive response. Nothing, she'd say, avoiding eye contact. My wife, on the other hand, acted like nothing was out of the ordinary. If anything, she seemed more animated than usual, chatting away about their outings as if nothing was wrong. By the fourth day, my patience was wearing thin. I'm not the kind of guy to jump to conclusions or get paranoid, but there was something undeniably strange about the whole situation. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were hiding something from me. It wasn't just her sister's behavior, it was the evasive way my wife avoided giving me straight answers about their plans. Every explanation felt rehearsed, like she'd prepared just enough to keep me from asking more questions. I started paying closer attention to their movements, hoping to pick up on anything that might explain what was going on. Each time they left the house, I'd ask casual questions about where they were going and what they planned to do. My wife would answer quickly and confidently, but her sister's silence spoke volumes. It was clear she wasn't comfortable, but I couldn't tell if it was because of me or something else entirely. On the fifth day, after another round of vague excuses and a particularly tense return home, I decided I'd had enough. There was only one way to get to the bottom of this. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to get them by asking directly. My wife's laptop seemed like the most logical place to start. She used it for everything, from work to personal messages, so if there was anything to find, it would be there. Of course, I wasn't about to do something like that while she was around. It would have to wait until she left for work. She usually took her phone with her, but the laptop stayed at home most of the time. That gave me a window of opportunity. I didn't feel great about the idea of snooping, but the constant secrecy was getting to me. I needed to know what was going on, and if this was the only way to find out, so be it. By the time the day ended, I had a plan. I'd wait for her to leave in the morning, make sure her sister was occupied, and then check the laptop. If there was nothing, I'd drop it and move on. But if there was something, at least I'd finally have some clarity. For now, all I could do was wait and hope that whatever I found wouldn't make things worse. The morning started quietly. My wife had already left for work, and her sister was still asleep upstairs. It was the perfect moment to put my plan into action. I sat at the dining table, opened her laptop, and steeled myself for what I might find. I wasn't proud of resorting to this, but the constant secrecy had left me with no choice. I navigated to her messaging app and started scrolling through her recent conversations. At first, there was nothing out of the ordinary: work messages, a few casual chats with friends. But then I found the thread with her new friend. My gut told me to focus there, and within moments, I knew I'd struck something significant. Their conversation was casual at first, filled with emojis and light banter, but the tone shifted quickly. They were discussing open relationships again, and my wife was more enthusiastic than I'd expected. It's such a freeing concept, she'd written. Honestly, I think it's something every couple should consider. As I read further, my stomach tightened. She had written that she'd met someone. It's nothing serious, she'd said, but it feels amazing to have that kind of freedom. She went on to say that she planned to talk to me about opening our marriage that very evening. My pulse quickened. This wasn't just a passing thought or a hypothetical conversation. She was serious, and she'd already crossed a line without saying a word to me. What angered me even more was the way they talked about her sister. Between discussing their so-called freedom, they made jokes at her expense. "She's so uptight," one message read. "I don't know how she'll ever survive without loosening up a bit." Another comment implied that her sister's issues with their parents were somehow her own fault. Reading those messages made my blood boil. Here was someone who had come to us for support, and instead of standing by her, my wife had been mocking her behind her back. I closed the laptop, my mind racing. My wife's behavior was one thing, but the way she'd treated her own sister was something else entirely. It explained so much about why her sister had been so withdrawn lately. She'd already faced rejection from their parents, and now she had to deal with this kind of treatment under our roof. I couldn't let it slide. I went upstairs and gently knocked on her sister's door. When she opened it, she looked groggy but managed a faint smile. "Can we talk for a minute?" I asked. She nodded and sat down on the edge of the bed. I didn't beat around the bush. "Is this about why you've been upset lately?" I asked. "Is it because of what's been said behind your back?" Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked like she might deny it. But then she sighed and nodded. "It's not just that," she said quietly. "I've felt like I don't matter for a long time. First with our parents, and now even here. I thought coming here would be different, but," she trailed off, looking away. Her words hit me hard. This wasn't just about the messages, it was about a deeper sense of alienation and neglect. I decided to tell her everything. I explained what I'd found, sparing no details. Her expression shifted from hurt to anger as I spoke. When I finished, I proposed an idea. If she wants an open marriage, I said, let's give her one. But on our terms. I laid out a plan that would make her see the consequences of her choices. To my surprise, her sister didn't hesitate. "If that's what it takes to make her understand, I'm in," she said. Her resolve was clear, and for the first time in days, she looked like she had some fight left in her. We talked late into the morning, hashing out the details over coffee and, eventually, a couple of drinks. By the time we were done, we had a plan, and her sister seemed more at ease. I didn't know how this would play out, but one thing was certain, things were about to change in this house, and not on my wife's terms. It was early evening when I heard the sound of the front door slamming shut. My wife's voice echoed through the house before I even saw her. "We need to talk," she shouted, her tone sharp and commanding. I stayed where I was, upstairs in the bedroom, taking my time to respond. "Come up if you want to talk," I called back, my voice calm but deliberate. There was no urgency in my tone, and I knew that would only fuel her temper further. The sound of her heels clacking against the stairs filled the silence as she stormed up to the bedroom. Her determination was written all over her face when she appeared in the doorway. "I've made a decision," she began without preamble, her hands on her hips. "We're opening our marriage, and that's final. I'm tired of living by these outdated rules. I'm a strong, independent woman, and I refuse to be held back any longer." She spoke with the confidence of someone who expected no resistance. "Oh, is that right?" I said, my tone still even, as I leaned back against the headboard. "Why don't you come in and we can discuss it properly?" There was no hint of agitation in my voice, and I knew she wouldn't immediately catch on to the trap she was walking into. She stepped fully into the room, clearly ready to launch into another monologue, when her eyes landed on the scene before her. Her sister was kneeling in front of me, clearly engaged in something intimate. Her face twisted in disbelief, and for a moment, she was too stunned to speak. Then the reality hit her, and the explosion came. "What the hell is this?" she screamed, her voice breaking. Her shock quickly turned into fury as she pointed an accusing finger at me. "How dare you? How could you do this to me?" I didn't move from my spot. "You wanted an open marriage," I said calmly, meeting her gaze without flinching. "This is what it looks like. Or did you think it was only going to go one way? That you could have your freedom while I stayed here waiting for you?" My words were measured, deliberate, and each one seemed to push her closer to the edge. "This isn't what I meant," she yelled, her voice cracking. "You're disgusting. An open marriage doesn't mean you can just..." She gestured wildly toward her sister, unable to finish the sentence. "This is betrayal. Absolute betrayal." Her hypocrisy was almost laughable, but I wasn't in the mood to laugh. "You made your choice," I said, cutting her off. "You decided to bring someone else into our marriage without even talking to me first. You thought you could just dictate the terms and expect me to fall in line. Well, congratulations, you got what you wanted. But you don't get to cry about it now." I stood up, my voice rising just enough to make it clear that I was done entertaining her theatrics. You wanted freedom. Now you have it. Enjoy it somewhere else. She stared at me, her face a mix of rage and disbelief, before turning on her heel and storming out. The sound of her stomping down the stairs and slamming the front door behind her echoed through the house. I stood there for a moment, the silence settling in after her departure. Her sister remained where she was, unbothered by the commotion, and I leaned back, letting the tension drain from the room. She'd made her bed, and now she would have to lie in it. For the first time in days, I felt a sense of control returning, even if the situation was far from resolved. After the explosive confrontation, the house was finally quiet again. I turned to her sister, who was still composed despite everything that had just unfolded. "Thanks for having my back," I said, meaning it. It wasn't the kind of situation anyone would willingly walk into, and yet, she hadn't hesitated. Her support in that moment meant more than I could put into words. She gave a small shrug and a faint smile. "It's no problem," she said. "Honestly, this whole thing has made me think about a lot of things in my own life. Maybe it's time for me to stop holding back and start being honest about what I want, too." Her words carried a weight that I didn't miss. It was clear that she wasn't just talking about the events of the evening, but about deeper issues she'd been grappling with for a long time. As the reality of what had just happened settled in, I knew there was no going back. I needed to make a decision, and I'd already made it. While my wife's betrayal had been the final straw, it was clear that the cracks in our marriage had been forming long before this. There was no sense in dragging it out any longer. I started gathering her things, methodically going through the house and collecting everything that belonged to her. Clothes, shoes, books, and anything else I could find. I didn't rush, taking the time to make sure I didn't miss anything. As I worked, her sister stayed nearby, occasionally helping when I asked, but mostly just keeping me company. We talked as I packed, and the conversation turned to their past. "You know," she began hesitantly, "she's always been like this. Self-centered, manipulative. Even when we were kids, she'd find ways to make everything about her. If I ever tried to stand up for myself, she'd just tear me down until I gave up." Her voice was calm, but there was an edge of pain that she couldn't quite hide. Hearing that didn't surprise me, but it did add another layer to the situation. "So, she bullied you?" I asked, glancing over as I folded another shirt into a box. Her sister nodded. "Yeah, but I didn't really think of it that way at the time. I just dealt with it. It's not like our parents did anything about it, and after a while, I just stopped reacting. I guess she took that as a green light to keep going." I shook my head, disgusted but not shocked. "Well, she's not going to be my problem anymore," I said firmly. "You don't deserve that, and neither do I. She's made her choices, and now she gets to live with them." Her sister gave me a small nod, her expression unreadable but contemplative. It was clear that she had a lot to process, just like I did. By the time I finished packing, there were several bags and boxes stacked neatly by the door. Each one felt like a small weight lifted off my shoulders. I took a deep breath, stepping back to look at the pile. It was a tangible reminder that I was taking control of the situation, that I wasn't going to let her dictate the terms of my life any longer. With everything in place, I opened the door and moved the bags and boxes outside. I didn't feel anger anymore, just a sense of resolution. She'd made her decisions, and now she would have to face the consequences of them. Once the last box was set down by the door, I turned and walked back inside, closing the door behind me. For the first time in
This story is almost unbelievable, full of ups and downs that could be a movie. I've been happily married for over 30 years, or so I thought. I have 3 beloved children and owned a convenience store gas station. I'm not rich, but make a good living. A few years ago, my 28-year-old son was hospitalized with a kidney problem. He's married with 2 children. My wife Annabelle, Annie, and I were terrified for his life. The doctor said he might need a transplant if his condition didn't improve. They suggested we talk to family members about donation possibilities. Without telling Annie, I got tested to see if I was a match. The results showed I wasn't compatible. Shocked, I asked the doctor why, considering he was my son. The doctor, embarrassed by my outburst, asked me to come into his office. "Mr. Weller, the test shows you're not his biological father. We're redoing the test to confirm," he said. In shock, I couldn't tell Annie yet. Questions about my other children, Janice and Mandy, raced through my mind. Janice was 26, Mandy 20. I hoped the doctor was wrong. 2 days later, the doctor brought good news. Brad's kidneys were responding to treatment, and he wouldn't need a transplant. Relieved, everyone cried with joy. I still hadn't told Annie about the test. The next day, I asked Annie, Janice, and Mandy for DNA samples, explaining it would help in future medical issues. Annie was nervous but agreed, as did the others. I also collected samples from Janice's family. The hospital confirmed Brad wasn't biologically mine. I asked them to analyze the other samples. "Mr. Weller, are any of them your family?" "They're all my family. I need to know if Janice and Mandy are my biological children," I replied. Brad was released from the hospital a few days later. After a week of recovery, he could return to work. Everyone was relieved he didn't need dialysis or a transplant. I tried to stay calm, but it was hard. I needed to know if my daughters were biologically mine. Annie noticed my odd behavior and asked about it almost every night. I told her I was just thinking about our children, which was partly true. One evening, I came home to find Annie crying over some papers from the hospital. "When did you do it, and why?" she asked. "I got tested to see if I could donate my kidney to our son. The doctor said I wasn't his biological father, so I had tests done on the girls too." Annie revealed, "Janice isn't yours, but Mandy is." She was crying hard. "What happens now, Dan?" I didn't know. After 30 years of marriage, I had just learned 2 of my children weren't mine. I told Annie, "We need to talk. Maybe we'll stay together, or maybe we'll split up." "Dan, that was over 28 years ago. Can't we leave the past behind?" "No, we can't. You had an affair. I need to know who I've been raising. Janice and Brad are siblings, so this wasn't a one-time thing. Who were you having an affair with?" "It was Harvey. It was stupid and wrong, but it's over." "Harvey, our best friend who died 25 years ago? Did his wife Mary know? Did she join you?" "Please, Dan, let's not discuss this. I love you. This is ancient history. Can't we move on?" "Are you out of your mind? We got married, and within a year you started sleeping with Harvey. I raised his child as my own. If he hadn't died, you'd probably still be with him. Explain this." Annie was crying, but I wanted the truth. "I know you and Harvey were friends. I always loved him, but he chose Mary. I loved you too, but not as much. After he married Mary, I was depressed. You asked me to marry you, and I did it partly out of spite. I wanted to show Harvey I could move on. Then we started an affair. You were often away, and Harvey would come by. It just happened. He stopped seeing me after I got pregnant with Brad. He asked if the baby was his, and I told him I didn't know but wouldn't tell you unless he married me. He laughed and said you could raise his baby. Do you really think I'm that stupid? It just happened." "What just happened?" "If you think I'll believe it just happened, you must be crazy." "What about Janice? Did the same thing happen to her?" "I told him he couldn't come over unless you or Mary were here. I had feelings for him, but he was using me for lovemaking. One day he forced himself on me and threatened to tell you about Brad. He hurt me and said he hoped he got me pregnant again. I couldn't tell you because I didn't want to lose you. After Janice was born, Harvey died in a car accident. I was sad but relieved. I could finally put it behind me and focus on us. I loved you more and more. We had a good life, didn't we?" Annie asked. "Yes, our marriage was good, but now I see it was based on lies. You cheated on me, married me while loving another man, and had children with him. Now you expect me to forget about it. I can't. I'm going to see a lawyer and start divorce proceedings." "Dan, you can't. What about our kids? What will you tell them?" "You can tell them. And just so you know, I don't believe you were molestated. You would have continued the affair if Harvey hadn't died. You have a week to tell me your story. After that, I'll tell them the truth. I assume Brad and Janice don't know I'm not their biological father. No one knows but me, and now you. Please, Dan, they love you. Don't hurt them by telling them their real father is a man they've never met. I am their father. I've raised them, and that won't change. We'll both stay here until the divorce is finalized unless you have another lover." "That's inappropriate, Dan, and you know it." "No, the problem is I've been with you for 30 years, and I don't know you. I'll move into the guest bedroom. I don't want anything to do with you." Annie wept as I relocated to the guest room. 2 days later, a call came from the store. Annie's car had crashed after speeding and failing to navigate a turn. Tragically, she died on impact. The sheriff probed for any issues, but I reported none, classifying it as an accident pending autopsy. Breaking the news to our children was agonizing for us all, fueling my doubts about whether it was truly an accident or something more sinister. Days later, the autopsy confirmed it was indeed accidental. At her funeral, I mourned deeply, despite our separation. 3 decades of shared history left me grappling with unresolved emotions. Choosing to keep her affair secret, I resisted consulting a lawyer. The day after her funeral, I asked my daughters and daughter-in-law to divide Annie's belongings, keeping only a few cherished family photos. Tormented by what-ifs, I pondered the consequences of my actions and wondered if things could have been different, or if fate had simply intervened on that fateful day. Update. This happened 2 years ago, just before the holidays. I found myself alone again. My son and oldest daughter live about 100 miles away, and I told them I could visit for a day or two. Mandy, a senior in college, planned to go to England with friends for the holidays. She worried about me being alone, but I assured her I had been living alone for 2 years and spent my days at the service station, never really alone. One day, while watching TV, I saw a commercial about donating $24 a month to help a child in a third world country. It made me skeptical about where the money actually goes. The next day, I asked our local priest, Pastor Jim, if the church had a Christmas campaign to help local families. "Yes, Dan, we do. Do you have a family in mind?" he asked. "No, I need the name of a family I can help," I replied. Jim suggested a young widow with 3 children whose husband was eliminated by a criminal. She had moved to our town for a fresh start. "Thanks, Jim. I'll come by later to get the name," I said. Pastor Jim understood my intent. Though not a regular churchgoer, I wanted to make a difference. I took the name Carmela Wilson from the tree at church. She worked as a waitress at Joe's restaurant where I often ate. I decided to visit Joe's diner to talk to her. At Joe's, I looked around and saw Carmen, who smiled and said she'd be right over. Carmen was in her early 30s, pleasant-looking, with shoulder-length dark hair. She wasn't thin or fat, just an attractive woman with a nice smile. "What can I do for you?" she asked. "Just a cup of coffee and some conversation, if you don't mind." "Sure, for coffee, but I'm not sure about the conversation," she replied. "I'm sorry, I'm not good at talking to women. This isn't a flirtation. I picked your name from the church tree and want to be your friend for the holidays." "Look, I'm not sure what you want. I'll just get your coffee." She spoke to Joe, who nodded, then returned with my coffee. "Okay, Joe says you're fine. I get hit on a lot and don't need that." "So what do you mean by holiday friend? The church put my kids' names on the tree for Christmas, but they didn't mention this." "This is my idea. If you prefer, I can just buy gifts for your kids." I was watching TV and saw a commercial about donating $24 a month to help children in other countries. It got me thinking, I want to help a family through Thanksgiving and Christmas. I'm not rich, but I can afford to help one family, and I chose yours. Carmen's eyes welled up. "Are you serious? I was so worried about my kids this year. You know, my husband was—" "I know, Carmen. He was homicided. Please let me help you. If I'm interfering, just tell me, and I'll back off." "Why are you doing this? Don't you have family to help?" "My wife died 2 years ago in a car accident." "It's okay, Carmen. My holidays have been pretty lonely, and I want to help someone else be happy this year. My children are grown and doing fine. So what do you say? Can we be friends for the holidays?" "You have a kind face, Dan. For the sake of my kids, I'll say yes. Please, no tricks. We've been through a lot." "Let's start by restocking your coffee and figuring out your needs." She poured more coffee and said she needed to get back to work, but agreed to talk after her shift. The next day, I asked her out to dinner, but she said she needed to be with her kids. Instead, she invited me to her home for dinner. "I'll bring pizza. Is pepperoni and cheese okay?" She smiled. "That's great, but bring 2 pizzas. My 8-year-old can eat half of one himself." When I visited her place, I realized she lived in a housing project. These places often have social services support, but are not the best environments due to pills, lovers, and other issues. Now, more than ever, I wanted to help Carmen and her children. Her 8-year-old son met me at the door. He was a cute boy and asked what I wanted. I said I was the pizza delivery guy and that his mom had invited me. He grinned and said, "Mom said her friend is bringing pizza today. We don't get pizza from the store very often." As I entered, 2 other children ran up shouting, "Pizza, pizza, pizza, Mommy, the pizza place is here," a 6-year-old yelled. Carmen appeared from the other room, having tidied up. "Children, where are your manners? I thought I taught you better." "Sorry, Mom, we were just excited," her oldest son said. "We don't get visitors often. Can we have pizza now?" Kids, this is Dan, a friend of mine. You can call him Uncle Dan or Mr. Dan. I interrupted. Just call me Dan. What's your name? The oldest replied, My name is Mike, and I'm 8 years old. The second one said, I'm Mark, and I'm 6. This is my little sister Molly. Molly added, I know who I am. My name is Molly, and I'm 4, soon to be 5. I go to kindergarten, and I'm very smart. She looked a lot like her mom. We all sat down to eat pizza. The furniture was old, and they didn't have much. The TV was on, but the picture was poor. While the kids ate and watched cartoons, I asked Carmen what help she needed. Oh my God, I wasn't prepared for this. My kids and I are doing fine. They want what other kids have, but I can't afford it. You've seen our TV with the bad picture. We buy clothes secondhand. They're great kids, but I can't buy bikes or anything that might get stolen, so any gift would be appreciated. Okay, I'll see what I can do. Mike, how about going to the movies on Saturday? There's a new Harry Potter movie. Wow, that would be great. Mom, can we go? Maybe if you behave this week. Dan, you know this is for you too, Carmen. Maybe we'll eat at McDonald's afterward. Molly said, I like McDonald's. They have Happy Meals and a playground. All right, Molly, be good for Mommy, and we'll go. The kids were thrilled, and Carmen was smiling. I felt good making them happy. We spent weekends taking the kids to fun places. I started eating lunch at Joe's and always sat in Carmen's section, leaving her big tips. Dan, you don't need to do that. Just make my kids happy. So you don't need the money? I smiled. That's not fair, Dan. I can use the money. I just feel awkward and indebted. Can I make you Thanksgiving dinner or something? I need to do something for you too. I'll talk to the kids, see what's on our agenda, and call you back. Carmen, I do this because it makes me happy. I enjoy helping people who are trying to help themselves. Please don't feel like you owe me anything. Seeing the kids' faces is enough payback, and your smile is a bonus. She looked slightly embarrassed and turned away. Mandy came home one weekend and asked what was new. I told her about Carmen and how I was helping her. Dad, do you think this is a good idea? You don't really know her. Honey, helping someone and seeing those kids' faces gives me a new sense of purpose. I want you to meet Carmen and give me your honest opinion. I don't know, Dad. It makes me uneasy. Isn't that a rough neighborhood for a single mom and her kids? Exactly. That's why I want to help them. You've grown up and don't need my help as much anymore, so I feel I should help someone else. I'll meet them, but I won't promise anything. I'll be honest with you. Mandy was worried, but agreed to meet them. On Saturday, I invited Carmen and the kids over. It was chilly, but I decided to grill. Carmen arrived in a beat-up car with the kids. As she unbuckled them, Mandy remarked sarcastically, Nice car, Dad. What would you say if she drove up in a new car? I asked. Great idea, Dad. This is for you. She smiled. Mike and Mark ran up to me. Hey, Uncle Dan. Wow, you live here? What a big house. I introduced them to Mandy as Carmen got Molly out of the car. Mike, Mark, this is my daughter Mandy. Hi, boys. Nice to meet you, Mandy said. Hi, I'm Mike. I'm 8, and Mark is 6. That's our sister Molly. She's 4. Molly walked over, and I picked her up. Mandy watched me closely. Molly is my little friend. She holds her own against her brothers, just like you used to. I laughed. Carmen, this is Mandy, my pride and joy. They greeted each other, and I could almost see their minds working. Carmen smiled and said, I know this is different. I know you have questions. Let's enjoy today, and I'll try to answer them. Your father is one of the nicest people I've met. Show me the kitchen, and we can cook together. Men think grilling is a whole meal, but we know better. Mandy looked at me and said, I like her already, Daddy. They smiled, and we went inside. The kids explored the house, but were told to stay out of the drawers and not to run. They came back excitedly and told their mom everything they saw. They asked to watch my big screen TV, and I suggested we go to the store to pick out some DVDs. They eagerly agreed, and Molly asked to go too, but Carmen intervened. Molly, why don't you stay here with Mandy and me to help us cook? We girls need to stick together, Carmen suggested. Molly then told me, Uncle Dan, take the boys and go ahead. I have to help the girls cook. It was adorable coming from a 4-year-old. I assured her it was okay and promised to rent a movie just for her. I got The Little Mermaid, and she was thrilled. She asked Mandy and her mom to watch it with her and told the boys they could watch too if they were quiet, acting like a little adult. We decided to spend Thanksgiving at my house. Carmen and Mandy would cook, and I would keep the kids busy. I had a pool, closed for winter, and a hot tub, so the kids would bring their swimsuits to soak in it and then watch movies on the big TV. Mandy said she would contact Brad and Janice about the plans and let them know to bring swimsuits if they wanted to use the hot tub. After Carmen and the kids went home, Mandy and I talked. Dad, Carmen is very nice. She's hardworking and has been through a lot with her husband's homicide. I understand why you want to help her and the kids. She doesn't make excuses and genuinely cares about you. I hope she's at least a little grateful, I said. No, Dad. I mean, she might really maybe even love you. She didn't say that, did she? Dad, she didn't have to. Women can sense these things. I think you've fallen for her too. Just be careful. Mandy, I'm just happy to help. This is the happiest I've seen you since Mom died. I just want you to be aware. Mandy's observation hit home. I felt a deep connection to Carmen and her children. Brad and Janice hesitated, but eventually accepted my invitation for Thanksgiving, understanding my involvement with Carmen's family through the Church Tree Initiative. Carmen and Mandy orchestrated the arrangements smoothly over the ensuing weeks, with Carmen taking the lead in planning. Mandy's return home on Fridays became a routine, and I frequented Carmen's restaurant for lunch, often dropping by her apartment to visit the kids and bring treats. Carmen jokingly accused me of spoiling them. Despite my occasional discomfort seeing Carmen interact with customers, particularly men who flirted with her, I recognized my lack of entitlement to jealousy. Update. On Thanksgiving morning, Carmen and her kids showed up early, Carmen looking lovely in a simple outfit. They and Mandy were already busy in the kitchen. Mandy mentioned she'd invited her boyfriend, a paramedic still in college, to join them. They were headed to England for a hospital project over the holidays, leaving just before Christmas and returning in January. Brad, his wife Gail, and my grandkids arrived next. After hugs all around, the kids immediately inquired about the hot tub. I introduced them to Carmen's children, and they hit it off. Mandy introduced Brad and Gail to Carmen as a good friend, which pleased me. Brad seemed intrigued, while Gail offered to assist in the kitchen. Soon after, Janice and Rob arrived with their kids, who headed to the basement to play with the available toys and gadgets. While the women cooked, the men tried to stay out of their way. The guys were curious about Carmen, and I attempted to explain her situation without revealing too much of my own feelings. Turns out I wasn't very subtle about it. She looks good, Dad. How old is she? About my age? Brad asked. She's 31, Brad. She's a wonderful person and deserves some help. Rob added, Dad, aren't you afraid she might fall in love with you, or you with her? Look, I'm a widower, and she's a widow. If something happens, so be it. Dad, this is kind of inappropriate and personal. Brad, as my son, I'll tell you. No, I haven't even tried to kiss her. She's a wonderful woman, and I care about her. I'm sorry, Dad. I know it's none of my business. You must miss Mom. It's been 2 years. This has nothing to do with your mother. I'm lively, and if I find someone attractive, it's my business. Let's change the subject and check on the kids. We went downstairs to watch the kids. Carmen's children got along well with mine. Molly kept coming up to talk to me, which bothered Brad, but Rob found her sweet. Mandy brought her boyfriend Ross down to meet everyone. After introductions, Mandy went back upstairs, and Ross joined our conversation. I met Mandy's friend, Carmen. She's nice. Mandy told me her husband was homicided. I introduced Carmen's kids to Ross. Good kids. Too bad about their father. It's great you're helping them, Mr. Weller. Thanks, Ross. I picked their name off the church tree. So, what's new with you? School and work must be busy. Yes, but we're going on a trip soon. It's work-related, but I'll be with Mandy. How are you and Mandy doing? Brad asked. Ross looked at me, then back at Brad. I love her and plan to propose in front of Big Ben in England. Mr. Weller, do I have your permission? Ross, you don't need my permission. Mandy is capable of making her own decisions. If you need my blessing, you have it. Should I ask her? I think so, but don't mention it yet. I'll see if she's ready. I love her, but I want a yes. Our lips are sealed, Ross. Good luck. The afternoon went wonderfully. Dinner was fantastic, and everyone enjoyed themselves. The kids took turns in the hot tub, but no adults joined them. Carmen told me, maybe another time, and I held her to that. As the evening ended, Mandy and Ross left to be alone. I helped Carmen clean up, and Janice and Gail joined in. Brad told Carmen it was nice meeting her and wished her luck before they left. Janice pulled me aside. Dad, Carmen is great, but she's too young for you. I'm helping her, Dad. She loves you. We asked if she was dating, and she said she had a boyfriend. Dad, you're that boyfriend. Otherwise, she wouldn't have come today. Just be careful. After everyone left, Carmen gathered her kids and told me she had a great time and liked my family. I don't know why, but I leaned in and kissed her. It was a long, soft kiss. When we pulled away, she had tears in her eyes. You didn't have to do that, Dan. I have to go. She gathered the kids, who quickly said goodbye and got into the car. I approached the car window and said, I'm sorry I stepped out of line. Please forgive me. The problem is, Dan, I've wanted you to do this for so long. She drove away, and I didn't hear from her for several days. I was worried about what I had done. On Monday, I went to the restaurant, but she wasn't there. Joe told me she had to take Molly to daycare and would be back soon. I planned to return at lunchtime, but had to cover a shift at work. I tried to give Carmen space, knowing I had overstepped. When I got home, my phone rang. It was Carmen. Hi, Carmen. I'm so sorry, Dan. Our apartment was broken into. They took everything, even the old TV. All we have left are our clothes. She cried. I don't know what to do. The police are here taking a report. That's awful. Carmen, pack your clothes and the kids. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Everything will be fine, I promise. Dan, I didn't know who else to call. It's okay, Carmen. I'm glad you called. Now go pack and I'll be there soon. I drove over and found Carmen and the kids. Molly was crying and scared. I reassured her and decided to take them to my house. Carmen looked surprised. I thought you were dropping us off at a motel for the night. No, you're coming home with me. Pack your car and take my car with the kids. I'll drive yours. She didn't ask questions and did as I said. I spoke to the police officer, gave him my number, and explained they'd be staying with me. The officer said it was unlikely they'd recover anything. With his help, I got Carmen's car started and headed home. When I arrived, Carmen and the kids were on the porch. It's open. Why didn't you come in? You weren't here and we didn't want to just walk in, Carmen replied. Come on, boys, help me with the bags. Mike and Mark, take your stuff to the room with the bunk beds. Put Molly's and your mom's things in the front bedroom. If you're unsure, leave it in the living room. I turned to Carmen. We need to talk. Molly, help the boys organize. Dan, we can't live here. What will your kids think? Carmen, you need help right now. Let's try this for a few days. You and Molly can share the front bedroom and the boys will be comfortable upstairs. Dan, the boys have school and Molly has kindergarten. I have to work. Living here won't interfere. You might need to leave a bit earlier. I can help with school runs. Call the schools and explain the situation. Give them my name for drop-offs and pickups. It'll work out, I promise. Dan, I care about you. I like you a lot. Your kids know that, and I need you to know that. No, women just know it. Men think differently. Mandy, Janice, and Gail all know. I'm sorry, but I can't hide my feelings. I'll worry about my kids. You already have enough to worry about. And I'm not sorry I kissed you. Just thought you should know. I went upstairs to check the boys' room and ensure the dresser drawers were empty. Carmen assisted the boys in organizing their clothes, while Molly and I cleared out the dresser drawers in her room. Once everyone joined us, Molly asked if she could put away her belongings. While Carmen unpacked, I took the boys to prepare dinner. We settled on hot dogs and macaroni and cheese. During the meal, Carmen inquired about house rules. I explained that we would establish them gradually. Until then, the kids needed permission for everything, couldn't enter my room or office without invitation, and were to stay away from the closed pool. They could use the hot tub with permission and watch TV with approval. Keeping their rooms tidy was their responsibility. Carmen chuckled, knowing the boys weren't the tidiest, but at least the rules were clear. I looked at the kids, including Molly, who was always smiling at me. Kids, this is your home now. Have fun, but always ask your mom if you're unsure about something. Uncle Dan, what if we get hungry? Mike asked. Eat. Tomorrow your mom and I will buy snacks. You will always have food. Remember, your mom is the boss. If your mom says no, don't ask me, and vice versa. No means no. Any other questions? Molly raised her hand, which made me laugh. What, honey? Carmen asked. Are we allowed to play with the toys in the basement? Because they're not ours. Honey, you can play with all the toys downstairs. We'll talk to Santa, and he'll probably get you some of your own, I told Molly. Molly raised her hand again. Can I go play with them? Yes, honey, you go ahead. I'll join you in a bit, Carmen said. Molly headed downstairs, followed by the boys. One of them shouted, Uncle Dan, can we turn on the TV? I replied, yes, just not too loud. Carmen hugged me with tears in her eyes and said, I don't know what I would have done without you. She wiped her tears, and we didn't kiss or hug again. I squeezed her hands and said, I'll always be here for you. Let's see what the kids are doing. We went to the basement to join the kids. It felt like a family. It reminded me of when Annie and I used to watch the kids play. As it got late, Carmen told the children to take a bath and get ready for bed. She asked the boys to use the bathroom upstairs, and if Molly could use the main bathroom on the first floor. Carmen, this is your home now. Of course, Molly can use the big tub and shower. I'll use the basement shower if needed. Please, make yourself comfortable. While Carmen got the kids ready for bed, I went to my office to work on my books. I saw Molly peeking in, dressed in her nightgown. Hi, Molly. Do you need anything? I want to kiss you goodnight, but Mom said I can't come in until you say so. Come on in, sweetie. She climbed into my lap, wrapped her arms around my neck, and kissed my cheek. Good night, Uncle Dan, she said. Good night, sweetheart. Where's Mommy? Upstairs arguing with Mikey and Marky. Let's go help. We went upstairs and found them mid-argument. But Mom, Mike always gets his way because he's older. I just asked for the top bunk, and he said he gets to choose because he's older. Carmen looked at Mike. Is that what you said, Mike? Yeah, but I'm older, so I should get to choose. Mike, you're 2 years older, so you should be 2 years smarter. Is it worth arguing over which bed you sleep in? Why not share the top bunk and take turns? Mike looked at Mark. Okay, Mark, you can have the top bunk this month, and I'll take it next month. We'll swap every month. Deal? Yeah. Thanks, Mike, Mark said, climbing into the top bunk. You feel good inside, don't you, Mike? Carmen asked. Yeah, I guess so, Mom. Carmen kissed her sons, then put Molly to bed. I need to get back to my papers and get ready for bed myself, Carmen said. I went back to my office and heard the shower running, thinking about Carmen. When she finished, she came out in her nightgown and robe, her hair still wet. Good night, Dan, and thanks for everything. I looked up and said, Is there anything you don't look good in? She smiled and headed to bed. I could smell her scent and took a few deep breaths, then continued working. Our first morning was hectic. Carmen asked me to call Joe and inform him she might be late. She needed to update the school and daycare about the change of address. When I called Joe, he questioned if I was serious about Carmen, expressing concern for her well-being. Being married for over 40 years, he didn't want her to get hurt. I reassured him that I would never injure Carmen or her kids. In the evening, we returned to her old apartment to gather her belongings, which weren't much. She returned her keys and informed the office about the move due to the break-in. Mike and Mark rode with me in the truck, while Carmen and Molly followed in her car. Upon our return, Carmen received a call from Mandy. After explaining the situation, Mandy requested to speak with me. Dad, are you sure about this? You know she loves you, right? What should I have done, Mandy? Just give her money and tell her to manage on her own? I care about her. We're adults and haven't done anything wrong. I'm actually happy she and the kids are here. It's almost like the good old days. Dad, it's a fine line. I like Carmen as a sister, but you two need to be careful and understand what you're doing. Now, can I talk to Carmen again? She talked to Carmen for about 20 minutes while the boys and I brought the rest of the stuff inside. What did she want after I gave you your phone back? I asked. Mostly girl stuff, but she's worried about us. What's there to worry about? We're adults. I'm in my 50s and can make my own decisions. Dan, she knows how much I care about you. I told her that myself, and now you know. I tried to explain that I didn't know where this was going, but you helped me and the kids. I'm eternally grateful for that, but my feelings are stronger than my gratitude. Mandy is worried one of us will get hurt. I told her I would never come between you and your family. Okay, let's take it one day at a time. Maybe time will help. Just then, Mike and Mark walked in. Uncle Dan, can we go in the hot tub? I looked at Carmen and then at the kids. Only if your mom comes in. You can't go in alone. Come on, Mom, please. It's warm and has lots of bubbles. Okay, boys, get your swimsuits on. Molly, get yours and I'll be right there. She turned to me. You set me up, didn't you? I just smiled, and she smiled back, then put on a two-piece swimsuit. Happy now? She asked, smiling as she walked by. I definitely agree. You rock any outfit. I'm willing to bet you look stunning even without clothes. I grinned. Creep, she retorted, smiling as she headed for the hot tub. The kids eagerly awaited her. Wow, she's even more beautiful, I pondered as she settled into the tub. She seems to have it all. After a few minutes, I handed Carmen a drink. She smiled and said, The water feels great. My body needed this. The kids watched the bubbles. Thanks, Uncle Dan. This is really cool, Mike said. I took one more look at Carmen and went to finish my paperwork. Later, I heard everyone getting ready for bed. Soon, Molly peeked into my office, smiling and waiting for permission to enter. No one could reject this little girl, or her mom. Molly climbed into my lap, kissed me, and hugged me goodnight. Uncle Dan, see you in the morning. I owned a gas station with self-service and a small grocery store. I no longer repaired cars, but occasionally used a tow truck. Carmen called, saying her car wouldn't start again, which was frustrating. I took the tow truck to the diner to pick her up. Two guys there offered to hook up her battery, clearly hitting on her. She told them no thanks, her friend was coming. When I arrived, they backed off. I told them, thanks, but I'll take it from here, which made them nervous. They left quickly. I hooked up her car, and she climbed into the truck, showing a lot of leg as she straightened her dress. Thanks for coming, Dan. I told you I'd always be there for you. Are you upset someone else offered to help me? Yes and no. I want people to see how amazing you are, but it bothers me when they hit on you. I didn't do anything wrong, Daniel. I know. I was just answering your question. Besides, I don't own you. You told those guys I was your fiancé. Why? I didn't answer. I just drove to the junkyard. Why are we here, Dan? I'll give you a couple of $100 for that junk car. Get your personal stuff out and put it in this garbage bag. We'll sort it later. What am I supposed to drive? We'll talk later. We need to hurry to get the kids. She loaded her stuff, and we got $300 for the car. We picked up Molly's car seat and headed home. I opened the garage and told Carmen she could drive my old car. It only had 8,000 miles and was 4 years old. I bought it with insurance money after Annie's accident. I usually drove the truck, so the car was rarely used. She put Molly's car seat in and left to get the kids. When they got back, Mark said they had a new car, and it was nicer than their mom's old one. Dan, I'll pay you for the car. How much do you want? Carmen asked. Just drive it. You need something better. It's a good car. I'll keep it in my name and pay the insurance. It'll save you money. What if we don't stay together? What if I move? Are you thinking of moving? No, I was just wondering what I'd do with the car if you kicked us out. I'm sorry. I couldn't believe this was our first fight over the car. Carmen, I promise you'll always have a car. I'll put it in writing if you want. I was just worried about you in that old car. I want you safe and here with me. She kissed me, and it felt good. Molly looked at her brothers and said, Mom just kissed Uncle Dan. It was a thank you for letting us use his car. No, it's your mother's car now. She kissed me because I gave her the car. Carmen kissed me again. Okay, everyone, time to get ready for dinner. Should I cook or should Mom drive us to McDonald's in her new car? McDonald's, everyone shouted. Update. I was at the store on Friday while Carmen was at work. My kids, Brad, Janice, and Mandy, came to see me. Dad, we need to talk. Can we go to your house for a bit? They said. Sure, go home. I'll be there in a few minutes. I knew what this was about and was ready. When I got home, they were all in the living room. Dad, this is about Carmen and her kids, Brad began. Seriously, Brad, you drove 2 hours for this? What did Carmen do to make you dislike her so much? It's not that we dislike her, Janice said. One day you're helping her, and the next she's living here with her kids. Your car is gone too. Did you give it to Carmen? As my kids, I'll explain, but I'm disappointed in all of you. Dad, I think Carmen is using you, Brad said. You're lonely, and she meets your needs. You fell in love, and now her kids are taken care of. Crap, Brad, Mandy jumped in. I know Carmen better than you. She loves Dad, and he loves her. I'm here to support them. Brad, if you weren't my son, I'd knock you off your chair. What should I have done when Carmen needed help? Give her money? Ignore her? I did what I thought was right. Dad, are you saying you've never had lovemaking with her? Janice asked. No, we haven't. Not that it's your business, and I'm thinking of asking Carmen to marry me. What? Brad said. You hardly know her. She has a lot of baggage and 3 kids. She's closer to my age than yours. You all have your own lives. I've found someone I care about who cares about me too. I have a big house to share. Why are you against it? Okay, Dad, Brad said. Let's say you love each other. Do you really want to start over raising 3 young kids? I love those 3 kids. They remind me of when you and I used to play, Brad. Molly hugs me and sits on my lap like you two did when you were little. They're great kids, and I can make a big difference in their lives. Dad, you're seeing things too positively. They're not your biological children. Do you really want to spend the next 20 years raising kids that aren't yours? What do you think, Janice? Should they be my biological kids? I don't know. I love you, and you'll always be my father. But can you raise someone else's child? I don't know, Janice. Would you have loved me if I wasn't your biological father? Would you consider me your father if I wasn't? You're my father, and it's too hypothetical. You've always been there for me, so I'd still consider you my real father. But what does that have to do with raising Carmen's kids? Hold on, I have something to show you. I brought out the DNA tests. Your mom and I kept some secrets. It might be a mistake to show you, but you need to understand. I love Carmen's kids and know I can be a good father to them. I handed them the DNA results. What is it? Janice asked. These are your DNA results, Brad and Janice. They show your siblings with the same biological parents. But Mandy's results are different, meaning only one of her parents is the same as yours. Mandy started crying. Are you saying you're not my biological father? No, Mandy, I'm not Brad's or Janice's biological father. They were all shocked. What? Brad said. You've always been my father, Janice cried. Is that why you asked about my father? You are my father, no matter what the test says. I love you, Dad. I just want you to be happy with Carmen. I'm so confused. Brad asked, Are you going to tell us about our biological father? First, Brad, know that I have always considered you and Janice my children. Nothing has changed except what you know now. You are my son, and Janice is my daughter. It's not just blood that makes a family, it's love and compassion. I planned to tell them about their biological father, but I wanted them to know I always loved them like my own. The past with their mother was over, and I didn't want them to know we were going to divorce. Your mom and I married young. Both Harvey Kittle and I loved her. Harvey also loved Mary, got her pregnant, and they married. I married your mom and was very happy. Later, your mom told me she had married Harvey, and we all stayed friends. Your mom got pregnant with you, Brad, and then Janice. After Janice was born, Harvey died, and your mom became depressed. She confessed you two were Harvey's kids. I was shocked, and we split up for a month. I missed my kids, so we talked and decided to stay together. Your mom became a wonderful wife, and I loved you both as my own. Then Mandy was born, and she was definitely mine. We lived happily until your mom's accident. Dad, why did you take the kidney test if you weren't my biological father? Brad asked. I hoped and prayed I was a match for you, Brad. You were my son, and I would have given you my kidney in a heartbeat. Did you take a match test before Brad went to the hospital? Janice asked. No, it was expensive, and your mom had already told me the truth. There were no surprises. When I took the test, I knew the results. By the way, I have the test results of all your families. Brad, you and Gail are the biological parents of your children. Janice, you and Rob are also the parents of your children. Your mom was a great mother and wife. Let's leave it at that. I'm sorry, Dad. I was thinking more about us than about you and Carmen, Brad said, starting to cry. Brad, in situations like this, people often worry about inheritance. I think you're more concerned about that than about me and Carmen. You three will always be in my will, each getting a fair share. I'm disappointed you haven't shown compassion for Carmen and her children. Janice hugged me, saying she didn't believe the test, and that I would always be her father. I hugged her back. Just as I started to hug Mandy, Carmen pulled up. Well, looks like we're all going out to dinner, unless you want to tell Carmen why you're here, I said. Carmen walked in. Hi, everyone. What brings you all here? Mandy thought quickly. It's my last day off from home, and we decided to go out to dinner. Great. Give me a minute to change out of my waitress uniform. Kids, talk to Mandy, Janice, and Brad while I get dressed. Molly hugged Brad. Hi, Brad. I like you. Brad looked at me, realizing what I meant. Mike asked Janice, Did you bring your kids so we can play? We're learning to share our toys better. No, they're home. Maybe you can visit after Christmas, Janice replied. Can I, Uncle Dan? I've never been to their house. We'll see, Mike. It's still a couple of weeks away, I replied. Mandy asked Mark what was new. We bought a new car, and Mom kissed Uncle Dan. Everyone was looking at me, but Carmen saved the day. Yes, Mike. I kissed him twice for letting us use the car. We're using it now to go to dinner. Come on, kids, back in the car. Uncle Dan will drive, so you all sit in the back. After dinner, Brad apologized privately. I'm sorry, Dad. I shouldn't have questioned you. It's okay to wonder, Brad. It's just how you did it. If my actions bother you, let's discuss them until we understand each other. He smiled when I said father and son. Later, I talked with Janice, too. I wanted my kids to know I was always there for them. I'm still unsure if telling them was right, but it's done. Mandy asked if I could babysit so she could shop with Carmen. I gave them a list and money, asking them to store the items for me. I wanted to buy the kids bicycles since they could now ride them in a safe neighborhood. I asked Carmen if she needed money for shopping. No, I'm just buying for you and the kids for Christmas. I got $300 when my friend sold my old car. She was too proud to take more money. She wanted to give the kids nice things without spoiling them, which wasn't easy. I borrowed Carmen's car to take the kids shopping. She laughed. Just be careful and don't eat in it. I only got it a few days ago. We visited Santa and took pictures. I told the kids we were shopping for Mom for Christmas and gave each $20, explaining it was only for her gift. "Keep it in your pocket and only take it out when you're ready to pay," I said. The kids initially looked at expensive things, so I took them to a kid-friendly store. The clerk helped them find items within their budget, and I asked to be notified if they needed more money. The kids worked hard to find the perfect gifts for their mom. Mike asked if I could lend him $5. "Uncle Dan, Mom loves unicorns, and it costs $25. I'll give you the difference if you wash my truck." "Deal! Thanks, Uncle Dan!" Mike ran to buy the unicorn. Mark was looking at movies. "Mark, you're supposed to be shopping for your mom." "Mom likes Titanic and Shrek, but I don't have enough for both." "Take them both. Here's the extra money. When Mike washes my truck, you help him." "Thanks, Uncle Dan. Mom will love them." Molly couldn't find a gift she liked. "None of them smell like Mom," I whispered to the saleswoman. "White diamonds." "Sir, it's $50. She only has $20. "Tell her it's on special for $20 and I'll pay the difference." "Molly," the saleswoman said, "I have a bottle of perfume that smells like your mom. It's our last bottle and costs exactly $20. Molly smiled, pulled out her money, and bought it. We picked up our purchases and visited Santa again. I asked the kids to help me find a gift for Mandy. She was going to England, and I wanted to buy her new luggage. The children were eager to help, and I pretended to need their advice as we looked at the luggage section. "This way, Uncle Dan. The suitcases are here." "Thanks, boys. Now I need a set with 5 pieces." They found a set with 5 pieces of luggage. "I want to help, Uncle Dan. What can I do?" Molly asked excitedly. "You can pick a color for Mandy." Molly chose a bright pink set, but it only had 3 pieces. She kept looking and found a dark blue set with 5 pieces. So we bought that one. We stopped for lunch and then went home. The kids hid their gifts for Mom in my office. They put Mandy's luggage on her bed with a Christmas card signed by all 3 kids. When Mandy got home, she saw the luggage and was thrilled. She hugged and thanked them. The next few weeks flew by with work and the kids' school activities. We decorated a Christmas tree for the first time in 3 years, making the holiday season special. Mandy went to England, and we planned to visit Janice and Brad the day after Christmas. Christmas preparations were hectic, but our evenings were wonderful. We watched Christmas programs together every night. I bought Carmen a few things, including a gift certificate and an engagement ring. I also got her a hot red nightgown. Christmas morning, the kids were excited to find presents under the tree and in their stockings. Watching them open gifts and seeing Carmen's joy was heartwarming. Carmen got her favorite movies from Mark, a unicorn from Mike, and perfume from Molly. Molly said, "Mommy, that was the last bottle, and I just had enough money." Carmen smiled when she saw the $50 price tag. I got nice gifts from Carmen. She said Mandy helped her pick them out. I had hidden bikes for each child around the house, and their happiness was priceless. Molly and Mark got training wheels, but we knew Mark wouldn't use them since his older brother didn't. While the kids played, I gave Carmen a big box with hot nightgowns. "Wow, what made you buy this?" she asked. "This comes with it," I said, handing her a small package. She cried when she saw the engagement ring, and I asked her to marry me. "Why, Dan?" "Why?" "Because I love you and want you and the kids to be with me always. So, is the answer yes?" "Dan, the answer is no. Please hear me out. I love you, but we've only known each other for a couple of months. After the holidays, things will go back to normal. I have a proposition." "Okay, I'm listening." "I want to rent out our rooms and give you $200 a week. I want us to live as a family. If in 6 months you think it's not working, we'll make other arrangements. I need you to be sure and see that I truly love you. All I'm asking for is time. I'm not going anywhere until you send me away." She handed the ring back and kissed me. She asked to keep the nightgown, hinting that we should take our time and make sure marriage was what we both wanted. I could live with that, hoping it would bring us closer. The kids played with their toys all day. Despite the cold, they wanted to ride their bikes, so Carmen and I bundled up and watched them. In the afternoon, Mandy called from England to announce her engagement. We congratulated her and wished her a Merry Christmas. That evening, we watched A Christmas Story together, and the kids thanked me for the best Christmas ever before bed. Carmen took a shower, and I could smell her perfume from the hallway. She appeared at my door in her new nightgown, asking to come in. "Dan, I love you, but we need to postpone the wedding until we know each other better. Can we start tonight? Will you make love to me?" She smiled as she walked in, and we spent an unforgettable night together. In the morning, she was asleep with Molly. I made coffee and prepared for the day. We had breakfast and then headed to Janice's for Christmas dinner. Brad and his family were there too. We exchanged gifts, and I was touched they included Carmen and her kids. Mandy explained our tradition of not buying gifts for adults, but Brad mentioned Gail thought a sweater would look good on Carmen. Later, Brad asked if I had proposed to Carmen. I did, but she turned me down, I said. What? I can't believe it. She loves you, Dad. What happened? She thinks it's too soon. She wants to make sure we're making the right decision and wants to contribute financially. She doesn't want handouts, but a loving relationship. So we're giving it time. Wow, Dad, don't lose her. She's special. Time, Brad. We'll give it time. Life continued, and we formed a family. Carmen and I shared cooking duties and managed expenses through a joint checking account. Major purchases were discussed beforehand. Though I usually lunched at Joe's, I'd wait for Carmen to join me. We functioned like a married couple, minus the fights, enhancing everything with our love. Mandy observed our closeness, but remained silent. As Mandy's wedding neared, she asked Carmen to be her maid of honor, bringing tears of joy to Carmen's eyes. Although she considered Molly for the flower girl, she opted for one of her nieces instead. The lead-up to Mandy's wedding was busy. She had just graduated, and we were caught up in planning. My girlfriend was a bridesmaid. Fortunately, the weather allowed us to open the pool, keeping the kids occupied while Mandy and Carmen handled wedding preparations. I remained nearby. As the wedding approached, I pondered my relationship with Carmen. I adored her kids, and they adored me. I had a surprise planned for Carmen at the wedding, as we hadn't discussed marriage since Christmas. On the big day, I donned my tuxedo. Brad and Rob were in the wedding party, alongside Janice and Gail. Everyone was dressed up, and the ceremony was imminent. Carmen, as a bridesmaid, was busy. I sat with her kids in the front row, instructing them to behave. I would walk Mandy down the aisle. As the music played, Janice walked down the aisle, greeted softly by the kids. Gail followed, receiving the same greeting. When Carmen came next, the kids excitedly greeted her, prompting her to quiet them. The flower girl and ring bearer, Janice and Rob's children, followed, with the kids waving at them. As Mandy walked down the aisle with me, tears of joy filled our eyes. Molly's exclamation of, "Wow, Aunt Mandy looks like a princess," drew chuckles and a smile from Mandy. Then I took my seat. Glancing at my family, I felt immensely blessed. My daughter Janice, daughter-in-law Gail, beloved Carmen, daughter Mandy, and future son-in-law Ross. Brad and Rob stood with them, while my grandchildren played their roles. At the reception, Carmen joined me for the first dance. "I love you, Carmen," I said. "I love you too, Dan. Are you serious? Do you really want this?" she asked. "Dan, I mean it deeply," she replied, kissing me publicly for the first time. Later, it was time to toss the bouquet. Brad urged Carmen to join since she was single. Mandy threw the bouquet right to her. The garter toss followed, and Ross handed it to me, saying, "This belongs to my father-in-law." Everyone, including Carmen, was curious. She sat down, and I, on one knee, slid the garter up her leg. Reaching her hip, I pulled out a wedding ring from my pocket, still on my knees. "Carmen, after another 6 months surrounded by family and friends, I propose to you. Will you marry me?" Silence filled the room as everyone waited for her response. Then, from the crowd, Molly stepped forward. Seeing her tearful mother, she urged, "Say yes, Mommy. Dan, I love you wholeheartedly. I'll do anything to make you happy. Yes, I'll marry you." Cheers erupted. Mandy approached Carmen, and they both cried. There likely wasn't a dry eye in the place, including mine as I kissed my bride-to-be. Now happily wed, Carmen left her job at Joe's Diner to help run the gas station and convenience store. She's well-liked, making the workplace feel more family-oriented. We're considering adoption, a decision we'll make together. Molly already calls me Daddy, while the boys sometimes switch between Daddy and Uncle Dan, perhaps to confuse their friends. Reflecting on life, I wonder how knowing about Harvey Kittle, or if Annie's accident hadn't happened, would have changed our family's path. Life's fragility and the impact of early mistakes weigh on my mind. Snuggled with my new wife on the couch, we watch our new family play on the floor as we enjoy a love story on TV. Mark's Christmas gift, Titanic, brings us together except for Molly, who tends to doze off halfway through. I wish I could describe in a fancy or unique manner how I found out my wife was cheating on me, but I can't. It happened just like a cliché from a poorly written story. I work at an auto parts factory, specifically making brakes. It's not glamorous work, but it pays the bills. I'm one of the fortunate ones. I spend 8 hours a day from 4 to midnight, 5 days a week, operating an ancient machine. I'm decked out in safety gear, eye protection, earplugs, steel-toed shoes, and a denim apron. I meet my daily quota, and if I'm lucky, I might get a bonus at year-end. I have a cozy 3-bedroom house, a lovely wife, and 2 sons in elementary school. After 12 years of marriage, things seemed stable. Until today. We have 5 stations assembling the brake shoes, all powered by compressed air. In the 8 years I've been here, we've had no issues with the equipment. However, today, halfway through the shift, the compressed air system malfunctioned. The air needs to be completely dry to function properly, filtered and dehydrated by automatic equipment. But today, it failed. The dehydrator system didn't expel the collected moisture as it should have. I'm no expert, but I know when moisture mixes with high-pressure air, everything freezes, and work comes to a standstill. Instead of waiting around, they sent us all home without pay, naturally. It's ironic, my whole life disrupted by high humidity. Upon entering the bedroom, I observed a scene where a hairy back was moving on top of my wife, Marcy. Naturally, I turned on the overhead light, realizing that Marcy wasn't asleep. She expressed annoyance at my presence, asking what I was doing there. I anticipated fear, apology, or shame from her, but instead she seemed angry. I inquired about her anger, to which she responded by accusing me of knowing exactly what was happening. She expressed regret that I had to witness the situation, but blamed me for not coming home on time. According to her, if I had been on time, the other person wouldn't have been there, and she wouldn't have been caught. The guy, previously obscured by the bed, now turned to glare at me with a smirk. Marcy half-heartedly pulled the covers up for modesty. My mistake was grabbing him as he got off the bed. He seemed much larger standing than lying down. For my trouble, I received 2 incredibly hard blows to the ribs. I never managed to land a punch. Before I knew it, I was on the floor, struggling to breathe. I think I got drub on the side of my head, and that's the last thing I remember. I woke up in the hospital emergency room, my ribs being bandaged by a medical technician. Marcy sat nearby, looking disgusted. The technician finished up and left the room. "Marcy, who was that guy? And why was he in our house?" "His name's Tony. He's a friend, and I invited him over." "You were with him? You were with him in our bed? Our kids were sleeping down the hall." "Yeah, I know. If you hadn't made a scene, they wouldn't have woken up. I had to get my sister to watch them so I could bring you here." "What was he doing here? How many times are you going to ask?" "Tony and I have been seeing each other for about 6 months. We were trying to keep it from you. We don't usually come here, but I couldn't find a sitter." "Is it over now?" "No, it's not. Danny, you're a good dad and husband, but Tony's great in bed. I don't see why we should end it just because you found out. But I promise we won't meet here anymore. It's not fair to you or the kids." "I'm sorry, Marcy. That's not okay. It ends now." "Danny, if you try to interfere with my relationship with Tony, you'll regret it. He smack you easily and he'll do it again. If you do anything, everyone will know you're a loser. Our friends, family, even your coworkers. Your life will be a nightmare. Don't you care what anyone thinks? You'd stoop that low just to hurt me?" "If I have to, but I doubt you'll risk it. Tony thinks you're a loser, and I agree. You'll have to live with it, Danny boy." "Who is he anyway? Where does he work?" "He doesn't work. He owns Continental Classics, the luxury car place on Lancaster Pike. You know, the one you always wanted to visit but never did. He's richer, smarter, and better in bed than you. He's also stronger and better with his fists." "Why not marry him if he's so great?" "That's why I keep you, darling. Tony doesn't want kids, and I won't give mine up. You'll play house while he gets the love. You either accept it or everyone will know what a loser you are. And by the way, I'm moving your stuff to the guest room. No need to share a bed now that it's out there." "Who watched the kids when you were with Tony?" "Usually Karen, sometimes your parents. Speaking of which, Karen introduced me to Tony. I'll thank her later." They discharged me the following morning. Marcy wasn't around. I debated calling someone or taking a taxi. The taxi won. With the kids at school and Marcy absent from home, all my clothes and personal belongings were stacked on the guest bed. I anticipated Todd and Terry might have questions about the situation, but I decided to let Marcy handle it. Setting up my new living space took less than an hour. Various thoughts raced through my mind. However, there was no way I was going to let things unfold as Marcy intended. My first move was retrieving my old phone recorder from the basement. Although it only functioned with the landline, it was my only option. Marcy primarily used her cell phone for calls. Setting it up and concealing it behind some old paint cans took about 20 minutes. It was a starting point. Feeling terrible, I still mustered up enough to return to work. They offered me pain pills, but I hesitated to take them and then operate machinery. Opting for a couple of heavy-duty Tylenols instead seemed like the better choice. Marcy had seriously misjudged my relationship with my coworkers. I divulged everything that occurred the previous evening to them. They all brainstormed ideas, some better than others. It was reassuring to know my friends had my back. With an 8-hour shift ahead, each of us planned to devise ways to set things right. During our mid-shift break for supper, Glenn spoke up first. "Any ideas?" "I don't have one, but I have a cousin who works for DeMarco. He does vehicle detailing and despises him. He could provide intel on the business, buildings, or work shifts," Glenn shared. "That would be helpful, Glenn. Anyone else?" "Danny?" Barry offered. "I have 2 muskets and 2 pistols. You're welcome to any of them. None are registered, so there's no concern there." "Thanks, Barry, but that's a bit more extreme than I was considering." "Don't even want to hear my idea," Freddie interjected, followed by some laughter. "Tell us, Freddie, come on," the group urged. "I thought we could tie him to a tree, legs spread, and build a bonfire Indian-style between his legs." Although Freddie's idea was well received, it was unanimously rejected. Kyle, who hadn't shared yet, faced everyone's expectant gazes during lunch. "What? Don't give me that look." "Yeah, I've got an idea, but it's a bit out there." "Go on, Kyle." "I recall reading about a prison in Arizona that dressed love-making offenders in pink jumpsuits to humiliate them. I know Tony isn't a love offender, but something like that could embarrass him." "You mean put him in a pink jumpsuit? Wouldn't he just take it off?" "I was thinking if we could get to him, tie him up, and then spray paint him entirely with pink. That might do the trick, but he'd know who did it." "You've got to knock him out first, then leave him tied to the chair until he's discovered. Do we use medications or just punch him? What's your plan?" "I can grab a taser. All you have to do is sneak up and shock him. You're making it sound easier than it probably is. How do we catch him alone? And how do we approach without him noticing?" "I don't have all the answers. Just thought it was an idea." The buzzer signaled another 4 hours on the machines. My quota was down, so the other guys pitched in to help. Marcy was already in bed when I arrived home, keeping her promise not to bring him into the house. I had no clue what to do. Most of the ideas with the guys were like high school pranks. Might as well leave a flaming bag of dog poop on his doorstep. I needed genuine revenge. At noon, I got up. With the kids at school and Marcy moving around, I showered, shaved, and headed out. "Morning, husband. No kiss?" She smirked by the sink. Ignoring her, I left. Her comment didn't warrant a response. I needed lunch and alone time. The afternoon was spent killing time, figuring out how to get back at my wife's lover without causing trouble. Work awaited, and I needed to prepare. I decided to stop eating at home, the only time with the boys, but I couldn't stomach Marcy's cooking. Before I knew it, it was time for work. Things were normal until supper break when Carl announced proudly that he had a taser in the car for self-protection. He reminded Danny not to forget to pick it up and asked if Danny had ever used it. Danny replied that he hadn't, but they could try it out, eliciting groans from the others at the table. Despite the lack of new ideas, they all showed support for Danny, which made him feel better knowing he had friends. At home, the routine was ordinary, although working the graveyard shift had disrupted sleep patterns. Todd and Terry, up earlier than usual, suggested going to Chuck E. Cheese, which Marcy didn't mind since they'd be out all day. Marcy informed Danny that he would need to take a few vacation days as Tony's friend Wally would be visiting from Detroit next week, and they planned to go on a cruise to Cancun. She suggested that if Danny couldn't take the time off, he should ask his parents. Danny expressed skepticism about Marcy's plans, questioning her intention to go on a sea cruise with 2 guys. Marcy defended herself, saying it wasn't as questionable as Danny implied, and explained that Wally would be sharing a room with Karen, who had been friends with him for years. Danny responded sarcastically, acknowledging that it seemed dandy. He made a mental note to thank Karen later. Despite being up early, it seemed like it would be a long day. To pass time before Chuck E. Cheese opened, we visited the nearby Hobby Lobby. The boys were old enough to assemble most of the plastic models there. The end results weren't impressive, but they had a blast. I let them explore while I marveled at the crafts available for creative homemakers. If Marcy had been into crafts, maybe she wouldn't have brought home that hairy gorilla. Too late now. I was thrilled to find rows of designer paint and spray cans. There they were, 6 beautiful pink cans. They didn't hold as much as the ones at Lowe's or Home Depot, but they were pink. It was the only place I'd seen paint that color in a spray can. I took it as a sign and bought all 6. Todd chose a monster truck kit and Terry picked a tugboat. Plastic tugboat models were news to me. Before leaving, I grabbed a package of 10 large plastic cable wraps about 18 inches long. They looked sturdy enough. Chuck E. Cheese was ready by then. The kids spent about 4 hours and 2 pizzas there before they got tired. We fed ducks in the park with cheap bread before heading to my parents' house. They were glad to have us for supper and the evening. Todd and Terry watched TV most of the night, while I briefed Dad on the situation with Marcy. I realized I was telling people about it before Marcy could. Her threat seemed less significant. Dad promised to take care of the boys, which eased my mind. Around 9 o'clock, I called Marcy to say we'd be staying at my parents' house. Got the machine. After a big breakfast at IHOP, we found Marcy still in bed. I started mowing the lawn while the boys worked on their models. Even though it was a beautiful day outside, I let them go. I decided to make a full day of the lawn work, including edging and pruning. Things didn't go as fast as usual because I found myself chatting a lot. I had hedge clippers but borrowed a set from Mike Fielding across the street. His wife, Mary, loved gossip. I warned Mike about unfamiliar cars at our house because Marcy would entertain male friends. If they got rowdy, he should call the police. It was hard for me to manage things since I work nights. Larry Finley, from the local church board, lent me a spark plug wrench. I apologized for Marcy's recent behavior. Of course, he was curious about what I meant. Larry was even more of a gossip than Mary Fielding. In just 10 minutes, he had enough gossip to last a month. I skipped lunch and wrapped up work around 4 in the afternoon. After a quick shower, I headed to Rosie's Cantina and treated myself to the priciest dish on the menu. I'm not exactly sure what it was, but it was delicious. I spent the evening with my brother Dave and his family. Dad had already filled him in on the situation. I crashed on his couch for the night. My wife had a grand scheme. She intended to coerce me into compliance by threatening to expose me as a betrayed man. If I didn't endorse and back her infidelity, she'd make my life hell. It was an intriguing plan, but it had many flaws. In less than a week, I'd already spilled the beans to everyone. That pretty much nullified her threat. I also managed to portray her as a cheap tramp more effectively than she could have imagined. I don't think she foresaw any backlash. The next afternoon, when I stopped by the house to change for work, Marcy was waiting for me, visibly upset. She mentioned that Karen had informed her about rumors circulating among the neighbors that she was running a brothel at night. I reassured her that I had simply told the neighbors that she might have male visitors while I was at work and advised them not to be concerned about it. However, Marcy insisted that the rumors were spreading differently and asked who else I had spoken to. I admitted that I had spoken to everyone, thinking it would be easier that way. I hadn't mentioned anything to her parents or sisters and suggested she handle that before they heard the rumors. Marcy expressed frustration, feeling like the rumors were making her look bad. In response, I pointed out that the situation wasn't fair to me either, as it made me appear like a betrayed man. Marcy apologized but said she had to leave for work. She mentioned that she had managed to spend some time with the boys before leaving, though it wasn't the quality time she had hoped for. Glenn had some great news that night. Continental Classics shut down at 9 o'clock on Thursday night, so Tony could personally handle all the paychecks for Friday. He hated being disturbed while doing payroll, so even the cleaning crew was gone. Kyle took a few minutes to show me how to use the taser. No one volunteered to test it. The plan was falling into place. If I got caught, and I fully expected to, I'd likely face jail time. I didn't care. Tony DeMarco needed to be humiliated. If I got arrested, I'd ensure all newspapers and TV stations got the full story. Any publicity like that would crush him, or at least infuriate him enough to make a mistake. For the next few days, I only went home to sleep, shower, and change clothes. I hadn't eaten a meal at home since that first day. Finally, Thursday arrived. I arranged for my truck to have a dead battery, so Kyle picked me up. The floor supervisor rarely bothered the brake guys too much. As long as we met our quotas and maintained quality, they left us alone. The OSHA requirements for the job would work in my favor. With our apron gloves and welding goggles, we all looked pretty much the same. At 8:30, I slipped out the back door. The guys would take turns covering for me at my station. One of their posts would be empty, but no one really cared. Toilet breaks were normal and unregulated. The main thing was to create the illusion that I never left. I entered the staff entrance at Continental Classics and headed directly to the restroom. Around 9 o'clock, someone quickly checked the area before turning off the lights. 10 minutes later, I donned latex gloves and exited the restroom into a dimly lit office area. Tony's desk overlooked the showroom, so his back was turned to the door. It seemed easier than I had anticipated, Despite having a computer in front of him, he was using an old adding machine with paper tape. He didn't hear my approach. I zapped Tony with the taser on the back of his neck. His body idioted upright, and fearing he might turn around, I administered another shock. This time he twitched a bit before relaxing. Perfect. I secured 2 plastic cable wraps on each limb and brought along an old necktie to use as a blindfold. He cooperated without resistance. I rolled his chair to the showroom window. He would be perfectly visible when his staff arrived for work in the morning. The paint, a pretty pink color, required more coats than expected. It was absorbed into his clothing quickly, necessitating at least 3 coats in each area to achieve the desired effect. I just had enough paint, but barely. He looked quite striking in pink. After completing the task, I carefully packed everything back up. I had anticipated Tony waking up during the process, but he remained still. I had also planned to remove the necktie blindfold before leaving. I checked my watch several times, well within the time frame I had set, but I still wanted Tony awake before I left. 5 minutes later, I started to worry. I attempted to feel for a pulse without success. Perhaps the latex gloves hindered my sensitivity. I removed one glove and tried again, but still no pulse. Trying to find a pulse on his neck like on TV yielded nothing. I removed the blindfold and touched his eyeball with a pencil tip. No blink, no reflex. Needless to say, panic set in. I regained my composure, put the latex glove back on, and wiped everything I might have touched. I pocketed the necktie and cut off all the plastic ties. Removing them revealed marks from the pink paint, which looked odd. The white skin under the necktie made him resemble a pink raccoon. After ensuring I didn't overlook anything, I left for work. On the way back to the shop, I disposed of all items, including the taser, in a storm sewer. 10 minutes later, I was back at work making brake shoes. No one noticed my absence. After the shift ended, I informed the guys of what happened. They were all accessories, so I was confident nobody would speak up. Freddie was impressed, and none of them seemed concerned. Kyle drove me home, and we both noted the time of his drop-off. I didn't manage to sleep as long as usual. Around 10 o'clock, Marcy burst into my room. "What on earth did you do? What did you do, you little idiot?" Naturally, I just rolled over and gave her a puzzled look. "What in the world are you talking about, woman? Tony's dead. Karen called and said they found him in his office this morning. Dead. I suspect you had something to do with it. And I'll make sure you pay, you idiot." That was the second time she called me an idiot in 5 minutes. It was pretty clear I wouldn't be getting any more sleep, so I stumbled out of bed and went to the bathroom. Not eager to face Marcy's wrath, I took a long hot shower and shaved slowly. I even put on a bit of aftershave just to annoy my dear wife. I never made it to the coffee pot. A tall man stood in the living room conversing with Marcy. His hair was closely cropped and he wore a dark suit. The witch had called the cops, no doubt about it. I shook my head and headed into the kitchen for my first cup of the day. Marcy wore a sarcastic smirk as I settled into my favorite recliner. My uninvited guest followed suit. "Mr. Mercer, I'm Detective Darnell Green with an E. I'm here regarding the pass-away of Anthony DeMarco last night. Your wife mentioned you and Mr. DeMarco had a disagreement last week, and I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions." "Sure, no objections, but not here." "What do you mean? If you want to talk, let's do it in your office, not in my home. Is that okay with you?" I couldn't help but notice the frown on Marcy's face. I was pretty sure she had expected to be part of the conversation. "Your car or mine, Mr. Mercer?" "I have a few other things to attend to, so I'll meet you there." "Any particular office?" "Second floor, rear room 206. Just turn right when you get off the elevator. I'll see you shortly." Marcy was seething as I put on my shoes. I never got around to finishing the coffee, so I dumped it in the sink. I turned and smiled as I walked out the door. "I guess you'll get what you wanted, sweetheart." "What are you talking about? What do you mean, Danny?" 10 minutes later, I was seated with Detective Green on the second floor of the municipal building. For the next hour, Detective Green asked all the pertinent questions, and I provided suitable answers. He delicately broached the topic of the affair without dwelling on it or being overly blunt. Naturally, I had to acknowledge having a motive, but I insisted I never had the opportunity to act on it. It was a serious matter, but I endeavored to be cooperative without being cheeky. I think he appreciated my efforts to make his job easier, even though I couldn't provide a definitive answer. The most intriguing part of the conversation was learning that Tony passed away due to a heart issue. He had a pacemaker put in a couple of years back, which apparently didn't mesh well with the taser. They deduced the taser's involvement from the marks on his neck. I felt remorseful about Tony's pass away, yet there was also a sense of relief. Detective Green gave me the customary "don't leave town" spiel and mentioned he'd contact me after confirming my alibi. It was unexpected. I never imagined needing an alibi for anything. It was kind of thrilling. We parted on good terms, and I sensed that Darnell Green was supportive, which was comforting. After grabbing a quick meal, I tuned into the TV news. There was a segment about the demise of a local businessman, noting he had no relatives in the area. I withdrew funds from the bank accounts and then treated myself to a nice breakfast. There were tasks to attend to at home. Marcy wasn't around when I returned. It took me half an hour to relocate all my belongings to the master bedroom and hers to the guest room. The guest room had limited storage space, so I piled her things on the bed for her to organize. I checked the telephone recorder in the basement, finding nothing noteworthy. I gathered banking, insurance records, and other vital documents. Thankfully, Marcy's Volvo was in my name, simplifying matters. I stashed everything in a folder under the front seat of my truck. I phoned work and took a 2-week vacation. A few hours later, my beloved wife arrived. She seemed taken aback to find me at home. It was time to set things straight again. I grinned as I escorted her to the guest room. "What's this? Who do you think you are?" Her response was a smirk. "Tell me, damn it, what's happening, Marcy?" "I'll be using the master bedroom from now on. You can have the guest room. I suggest you start putting away your clothes. Anything left out by dinner will be disposed of. Any questions?" "I can't fit my stuff in that tiny closet, and I won't stay in that room anyway. What do you mean, disposed of?" "If it doesn't fit in the closet or dresser, you don't need it. This is non-negotiable. Danny, you're in trouble. Get your act together. If you need clarification, ask later." Idiot. That was the 3rd time that day she called me an idiot. I must be making some progress. While Marcy was occupied in the guest room, I emptied her purse on the kitchen table. I meticulously collected what I wanted. First, I took her cell phone and car keys. From her wallet, I removed her driver's license, credit cards, debit cards, and cash. I replaced the remaining items. I retrieved her car title from the pickup and drove her Volvo to a friend who owned a car lot across town. I sold it to him outright at a fair price, with the understanding he'd sell it wholesale out of town. Even after settling the loan, I pocketed a few $1,000s. As I headed into Taco Bell for lunch, my cell phone rang. "You witch! Where's my cell phone and where's my car?" I was relieved she didn't call me in schmirk this time. She was calling from the house phone. It was a good test. I could check the recorder later. "I'm sorry, honey. I had to get money to hire a lawyer for the homicide charges. I promise to get you another car once I'm out of jail," I said, ending the call and turning off the cell phone. After that conversation, I realized getting a lawyer was crucial. No matter what happened, I was determined not to stay married. But I had to wait. I was next in line to order. Todd and Terry were home when I arrived. I went straight to my sons, ignoring Marcy. I did glance her way a few times and noticed she wasn't happy. The boys eagerly showed me their models. When Marcy began preparing dinner, I wandered to the guest room. My clothes were back on the bed, Marcy's in the master bedroom. I chuckled, but chose not to argue. She seemed stubborn and resolute. Marcy instructed the boys to wash up for dinner, and I returned to the guest room to unpack. I would have loved to discard her belongings, but that seemed too immature. Red Lobster was my treat tonight. Money wasn't an issue. I still had cash after the lawyer's deposit. The shrimp and lobster combo was delicious, but the cheese rolls remained my favorite. After finishing, I switched on my cell phone, hoping for a call from work or Detective Green. The first call I received was from my wife, who asked how she could go to the grocery store to pick up some items, including milk. I assured her that I would take her when I returned, and suggested planning our shopping trips for Saturdays when I was off work. I expressed a preference for her not to go alone and mentioned another call coming in, prompting me to end our conversation with plans to talk later. The second call was from Kyle, who informed me that Detective Green had spoken to the entire crew individually and as a group, and everyone's stories had checked out. He mentioned that Tom Tingle, the floor manager, had strongly supported him, emphasizing that Kyle couldn't have missed work. After arriving home just in time to tuck the boys in, I found Marcy sitting on the couch with wine. I grabbed a cold Foster's and settled into my recliner, hoping to initiate a conversation. I asked Marcy about her plan to paint me as a villain, which abruptly ended the conversation. Marcy finished her wine, left for her bedroom, and I realized she didn't actually want to talk. Disappointed, I grabbed my beer and checked the recorder. The first call was to her sister, no cover-up there. It seemed Marge knew about the affair with Tony and supported Marcy. That was reassuring. The next call to Marcy's mom was different. Mom was clueless. Her daughter convinced her that Tony was a friend of Karen's, and I was jealous because I'd been pursuing Karen for years. Although she didn't directly accuse me of homicide, it was heavily implied. She contacted the cell phone company to inquire about a replacement for the phone I took but had no luck. Then, she reached out to the DMV to report the loss of her driver's license, and they advised her to inform the police. When she called the bank to request a new credit card, she discovered the account was closed. I'll give her this, she was quite active. The final call on the machine was to Karen. Even though Karen lived nearby, they opted for a phone call instead of meeting in person. It worked out in my favor, of course. From that call, I gleaned two important details. Wally was still coming from Detroit, and Marcy planned to keep a low profile until his arrival. The next day, the boys and I were up early and out of the house before Marcy woke up. We returned home after lunch, and Marcy insisted I drive her to the grocery store since she lacked a car and driver's license. That evening, while she prepared dinner, I checked the recorder. Wally had arrived and immediately called Marcy. Their conversation was intriguing. He believed Marcy's story and vowed revenge. Wally and Tony were childhood friends, and he was adamant about seeking justice. He provided Marcy with his contact information and instructed her to call him the following day. Afterward, Marcy excitedly phoned Karen, expressing her happiness. It was hard to believe this was the same woman I'd been married to for years. The transformation was sudden and complete. I never imagined my actions, aside from confronting her lover, warranted such a drastic change. Before turning in, I grabbed a burger. Knowing the lawn needed mowing again, I used it as an excuse to avoid Marcy the next day. Around 11 o'clock, Marcy's parents arrived to pick up the boys for an unplanned sleepover. But I didn't object. Grandma Wilcox assured they'd be back in time for school tomorrow. Eager to check the phone recorder, I postponed until after lunch since I skipped breakfast. Following a quick shower, I headed to Denny's. Marcy made no mention of my absence from home. She and Wally had devised a plan to avenge Tony's pass away, which seemed somewhat absurd to me given my knowledge of the situation. Their plan involved Wally entering the house through the back deck's sliding door while Marcy assured him it would be unlocked if all went well. It was meant to appear as a burglary gone wrong, with me being shot. Both Marcy and Karen were to call emergency upon hearing the gunshot. At that moment, I realized I hadn't updated my insurance policy beneficiaries. As I left, I sarcastically blew a kiss to my wife, receiving a finger in return. I had dinner with my parents and stayed the evening. Before leaving, I borrowed Dad's snake charmer, a short-barreled 20-gauge, for the upcoming event. Marcy was in bed when I returned home, her light on, presumably reading. The lone message on the answering machine came from Karen, boasting about her and Wally's pleasurable afternoon. Before signing off, she assured Marcy of her readiness later that night. It took me roughly 20 minutes to swap out the buckshot in the shells with rock salt, using a leftover bag from last winter. My intention wasn't to eliminate Wally, but merely to slow him down. Honestly, I didn't wish damage upon Tony either. I hoped Wally didn't have a bad heart like Tony did. Wanting to check the back deck door, I hesitated, fearing Wally might spot me. I had to assume Marcy left it unlocked. I stripped down to my shorts and mussed up the bed blankets. A cup of coffee would have been preferable, but since none was available, I settled for a drink, waiting in my recliner with the cell phone close by. He didn't arrive until after midnight. Upon spotting him on the deck, I promptly dialed emergency, reporting an intruder in my house and expressing fear for my life, keeping the line open. The patio door slid open quietly, revealing Wally. I waited until he was fully inside the house before delivering the first blast. I aimed for his lower body to avoid accidental pass away. The first shot knocked him back under the deck. With the second shot, he tumbled over the deck's side, breaking the railing. I knew I hadn't eliminated him as he howled in pain. Man, that rock salt must have caused quite the sting. I was amazed at how deafening the musket blast sounded indoors. My ears were ringing intensely. When I flipped on the lights, Marcy was already in the living room screaming. Although she was shouting at me, her words were unintelligible. I approached to check on Wally and noticed a Ruger .22 automatic pistol with a silencer on the floor. Marcy continued to scream, so I aimed the musket in her direction, causing her to quickly quiet down and flee the room. It appeared Wally had broken his ankle in the fall. Some guys seemed to have all the luck. 10 minutes later, the first police car arrived. There wasn't much discussion. I placed the musket on the floor to avoid any confusion about the situation. Pointing to the phone, I informed the officers that everything was under control. When asked about other occupants, I mentioned Marcy in the bedroom. Bringing her into the living room, the officers realized their mistake. Despite their attempts to quiet her, both Marcy and I were unsuccessful. Finally, a large female officer gently escorted her outside. I noticed Karen standing with some neighbors outside. I grinned at her and gestured across my throat, but she quickly walked away without reciprocating. The EMTs arrived for Wally as Detective Green showed up. He smiled at me, and I couldn't help but grin back. It wasn't intentional sass, but I couldn't resist. The female officer escorted Marcy back inside so she could dress. After getting dressed, we all headed to the police headquarters. I requested separate cars, and Detective Green agreed to let me ride with him. We didn't speak on the way downtown, but he smiled at me again. It was daylight when Green released me. Although we only spoke for about 30 minutes, they kept me at the station all night, making me drink coffee. One of the police cars drove me home. I was disappointed not to see yellow tape around the house. Everything looked normal, and even the rock salt hadn't damaged the glass door. Wally seemed to have borne the brunt of it. I estimated it would take about an hour to fix the broken railing. I went to bed and didn't wake up until after lunch. After relieving myself, I stumbled into the kitchen to find my amiable detective seated at the table, engrossed in the newspaper and sipping fresh coffee, which I presumed he brewed while I slept. Having had my fill of coffee the night before, I opted for a tall glass of orange juice and settled across from him. How he entered the house eluded me. "You're quite the chill guy, Mr. Mercer," he remarked, his eyes fixed on the paper. Uncertain how to reply, I remained silent, unsure if he was toying with me. Finishing his coffee, he finally spoke. "Detective Green, I need a shower, a shave, and some lunch. I'll treat, unless it violates some police protocol." "Take your time, Danny. I've got all day." Heading to the shower, I pondered when he found time to sleep. Lunch comprised 2 hefty pulled pork sandwiches, and Green even joined me in washing them down with a beer. As the silence grew palpable, he broke it. "You were itching to ask me questions, weren't you, Mr. Mercer?" "Funny, I had the same thought about you," I retorted. Green flagged down the waiter for 2 more drafts. "I spent the whole night grilling you. Now it's your turn." "All right, first off, where's my wife?" "She's still in custody. Charges will be filed this afternoon." Downing my beer, I processed the unexpected news. I had a flood of inquiries, but delving deeper risked exposing myself. Opting to retreat, I remarked, "Nice to see Marcy's folks rallying for her. As I won't be." "No more questions, Detective Green. But if you need to spill, go ahead." He chuckled, taking a swig. "One more thing. Did you happen to overhear or record any conversations between your wife and Mr. Williams?" "You mean Wally?" That earned me a smirk. "If I did have such a recording, would you want it?" "I'm unsure. If things unfold as I anticipate, it may not matter. But if they get skilled lawyers, having such evidence could be troublesome, right?" "You're onto something. I'm just trying to streamline my job. I'll manage without a hypothetical tape." I nodded slightly. "Thanks, Danny boy. I think I should drive you home. Your boys will return from school soon, needing their father." We reached the house just as Todd and Terry disembarked from the school bus. They approached us, and I introduced them to my new detective companion. Eager to see his badge, they expressed interest. However, the mood shifted when Green inquired, "So, who built the tugboat and who assembled the monster truck?" "I built the truck!" Todd exclaimed proudly, while Terry declared, "I did the tugboat. Want to see it?" With a promise of possibly inspecting them another time, Terry departed, leaving me stunned as he walked to his car with a satisfied grin. He knew about the pink paint predicament, holding the upper hand. Helpless, we ordered pizza for dinner, and the boys didn't inquire about their mom's whereabouts. After supper, Marcy's dad called, seeking assistance to raise bail money for her release from jail. Politely declining, I wondered if he truly comprehended the situation, but at least he tried to be a supportive father. Inquiring about her accommodation, he hesitated before stating she would stay with them. We assisted in loading Marcy's belongings into the pickup and dropped them off without issue. Returning home, I noticed a U-Haul truck in Karen's driveway, vanished the next morning. Marcy never reached out, leaving me to glean updates from the daily newspaper. I felt deliberately excluded from the unfolding events. There was no trial. Marcy pinned all blame on Wally, who countered it was her idea. Both accepted pleas, with Marcy receiving 3 to 5 years for conspiracy to commit homicide, and Wally receiving 5 to 10 years for attempted homicide. Federal authorities were consulted regarding Wally's silencer but postponed action until he completed his initial sentence. Detective Green didn't require the tape and ceased mentioning it. Karen disappeared without a trace. My dad reclaimed his musket, jesting that I might need it again. Chuckling, he mentioned Marcy served me with divorce papers. Once her jail term began, she didn't contest anything. I sensed she wanted nothing to do with me since I hadn't seen or spoken to her since the night I shot Wally. I sold the house and moved back in with my parents as I couldn't balance work and caring for the boys alone. My colleagues welcomed me back, and although offered a switch to the day shift, I declined. I regularly took the boys to visit their mother at Muncie Women's Prison. During these visits, I remained in the car, typically less than an hour, sometimes outdoors in good weather, observing them through the chain-link fence. I refrained from discussing the visits with them and requested they not share any details. It seemed to suit all of us well, and everything seemed to be going smoothly until I received the phone call. "Hello, is this Daniel Mercer?" "Yes. I'm Angela Hawkins. Detective Darnell Green suggested I reach out to you. There are matters we need to discuss." "I'm aware. But why do you want to talk to me?" "Tony DeMarco was my brother." "Oh, damn. Just when I thought I'd put all this behind me. Now this." "I understand, but I don't think avoiding this conversation is wise. I'm sorry for your loss, but I can't assist you." I ended the call before she could say more. 2 days later, she called again. "Daniel, I'd appreciate it if we could meet. There are things I need to address. Detective Green mentioned you're reasonable. Where should we meet?" "I'd prefer the auto showroom, but anywhere you're comfortable is fine." It took me a moment to respond. "Let's meet Saturday at 10 o'clock at the showroom. I'll bring my sons. They enjoy old cars." Unsure of her intentions, I felt safer in public with the boys. I didn't want to use them as a shield, but I believed she'd be less inclined to cause trouble with them present. I speculated about her potential grudge, assuming she might be Italian and hot-blooded. Eventually, I concluded I was overthinking and needed a beer. I called Detective Green for insight. He chuckled, advising me to meet with her and stop fretting. Easy for him to say, as he wasn't the one who eliminated her brother. Continental Classics was an expansive and impressive establishment. Apart from the main showroom, they possessed 2 sizable buildings in the rear, housing cars awaiting restoration or awaiting display on the showroom floor. It came as a shock when we arrived to find them hosting a grand opening celebration. I hadn't anticipated it. There were many aspects of the event that puzzled me. Terry and Todd appeared torn between the cars and the complimentary items. My first impression was the scent emanating from the popcorn machine. A man clad in floppy shoes and a rubber nose distributed small bags of freshly popped kernels, while adjacent stood a soda machine and another clown manning a hot dog cart. It seemed the boys wouldn't require lunch today. Angela Hawkins wasn't difficult to identify. The moment I observed her striding purposefully towards me, I recognized her immediately. Everything about her exuded Italian heritage: dark hair, eyes, olive complexion, and broad hips. While a gentleman might not have noticed the latter, they were accentuated by her stature, barely reaching 5 feet. Tony was colossal, whereas his sister was short and stout. I felt a twinge of anxiety as she approached, then noticed the miniature version of her by her side, a young girl of about 10, bearing a striking resemblance to Angela, albeit with lighter hair and naturally lacking any hips at all. It appeared my hostess employed the same tactic as I did for security, as we both relied on our children. As she closed the distance between us, her hand extended in a friendly gesture. "Daniel Mercer, I presume?" It felt only natural and polite to shake her hand, reminiscent of a scene from a movie about Dr. Livingston. Though she wore a smile, she seemed slightly nervous, which eased my own apprehension. I stood there silently, prompting her to continue speaking. It felt as though I were deliberately being excluded from the loop. There was no trial. Marcy pinned all the blame on Wally, who in turn claimed it was her idea. Both eventually pleaded guilty, with Marcy receiving 3 to 5 years for conspiracy to commit homicide, and Wally 5 to 10 years for attempted homicide. Federal authorities became involved due to the silencer Wally possessed, opting to await the completion of his initial sentence before taking further action. Detective Green never revisited the issue of the tape. Karen disappeared without a trace. My father was pleased to retrieve his musket and joked that I could borrow it again if needed. He chuckled as he said so. Marcy served with divorce papers. Upon commencing her jail term, she didn't contest anything. I sensed she wanted nothing to do with me since I hadn't seen or spoken to her since the night I shot Wally. Selling the house, I returned to live with my parents as I couldn't juggle work and childcare alone. My co-workers welcomed me back, and though offered a switch to the day shift, I declined. I regularly took the boys to visit their mother at Muncie Women's Prison, waiting in the car during their brief meetings, sometimes outdoors in good weather. I refrained from questioning them about the visits, asking them not to divulge anything. This arrangement seemed to suit us all well, and everything appeared to be running smoothly until I received the phone call. "Hello? Is this Daniel Mercer?" "Yes. I'm Angela Hawkins. Detective Darnell Green recommended I call you. There are things we need to discuss." "I understand, Detective Green. But why do you want to talk to me?" "Tony DeMarco was my brother." "Oh, darn. Just when I thought all this was over. Why does this have to happen?" "I don't think that's a wise idea. I'm sorry for your loss, but I can't assist you." I ended the call before she could say more. 2 days later, she called again. "Daniel, I'd appreciate it if you could meet me. There are some things I need to say. Detective Green mentioned you're reasonable. Where would you like to meet?" "I'd prefer the auto showroom, but anywhere you're comfortable works." It took me a moment to decide. "I'll meet you Saturday morning at 10 o'clock at the showroom. I'll bring my 2 sons. They enjoy looking at old cars." I didn't know her intentions, but felt safer in public with my boys. I wasn't using them as a shield, but hoped she'd be less likely to do anything. I realized I was overthinking. I needed a beer. I called Detective Green, who laughed and advised me to meet with her and stop worrying. Easy for him, he didn't eliminate her brother. Continental Classics was an impressive place with a main showroom and 2 large buildings at the back for cars needing restoration or display. I was surprised to find they were having a grand opening celebration. There were many things I didn't understand. Terry and Todd seemed torn between the cars and the freebies. The first thing that caught my attention was the smell of the popcorn machine. A person with floppy shoes and a rubber nose was handing out small bags of hot popped kernels. Nearby, there was a soda machine and another person with a hot dog cart. The boys wouldn't need lunch today. It wasn't too hard to recognize Angela Hawkins. I knew right away as she walked directly toward me with a slow and determined stride. Everything about her exuded Italian heritage. Dark hair, dark eyes, olive complexion, and broad hips. I suppose a gentleman wouldn't notice her hips, but they were emphasized by her height, barely 5 feet tall. Tony appeared imposing, and his sister had a sturdy build. I felt a bit uneasy as she approached, but my apprehension lessened when I noticed the smaller version of her by her side, a young girl of around 10 who closely resembled Angela, albeit with lighter hair and a less developed physique. It seemed we both found comfort in the presence of our children, a somewhat pathetic realization. As she came closer, she extended her hand in a friendly gesture, addressing me as Daniel Mercer. I shook her hand, feeling a sense of familiarity akin to a scene from a movie about Dr. Livingston. Despite her smile, she seemed slightly nervous, which helped ease my own discomfort. I chose to remain silent, prompting her to continue speaking. She expressed her intention for both of us to learn the business thoroughly enough to take control, emphasizing the need for me to assert myself in the meantime. Angela admitted that she was a nice person, which led Tony and his wife to attempt to take advantage of her. Her tone became more relaxed as she remarked on the unsuccessful outcome for Tony and his wife. I found her comment oddly amusing and chuckled. Over the next half hour, we discussed the terms of our arrangement. Angela offered better pay and benefits compared to my factory job, with the option to return if things didn't work out, although I hoped they would. Todd looked unwell on the way home, likely from too many hot dogs and sodas. Meanwhile, Terry seemed to enjoy himself, chatting with Carla more than inspecting cars. A positive sign. Todd got sick in the truck and skipped supper. I started work the following Monday. Things unfolded as Angela predicted. I quickly familiarized myself with the operation and gained support from employees, particularly Glenn's cousin, my staunchest ally. Most wanted the business to thrive and readily reported any misconduct. Angela delegated firings to me, a task I surprisingly relished. I lived up to my reputation. Detective Green visited for coffee often, though our conversations remained light. Eventually, he shared a personal story. 3 years ago, I was a cop in Philly. I returned home one day to find my wife in bed with my supervisor. I attacked them and threw my wife out. The department gave me the ultimatum to quit or be fired. A week later, I found work here. Before leaving, I ensured my wife's lover lost his job. I didn't press for more details. At least now, I understood why he seemed to favor my side. The boys agreed not to inform their mother about my new job. During visits, they casually mentioned the lengthy drive, but understood it was unavoidable. I felt it was crucial for Marcy to see her sons, not for her sake, but to inflict emotional pain. I know it's a terrible way to involve your kids, but I derived some twisted pleasure from it. Angela and I were spending more time together at and after work. One weekend, the boys insisted on taking her and Carla to Nobles Grove. Mostly we stayed close to home due to our living situations complicating any romantic prospects. While I was keen on a closer relationship with Angela, it wasn't feasible. I still resided with my parents and the boys, while Angela and Carla shared a small studio apartment. Since the business exceeded expectations, Angela discussed purchasing a house. She spent hours online searching for the perfect one. My first realization came when she mentioned wanting a 4-bedroom home for the boys. Danny, I think it's important for each boy to have their own room. It's better to address this now than later. Don't you agree? I recognized the question as a setup and sensed Angela viewed me as more than just an employee. The possibility of romance seemed promising. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. A split bedroom plan would also be beneficial. I don't like the idea of them being too close to the master bedroom, I added before leaving the office. Angela sported a small smile, marking our peculiar relationship. Though we never engaged in lovemaking or closeness acts, I felt closer to her than I did to Marcy in 12 years. 2 days after finalizing my divorce from Marcy, we all celebrated at Red Lobster. While the kids were unaware of the reason, Angela knew. Later at the apartment, while the kids watched a pay-per-view movie, Angela kissed me in the kitchen. We hugged and giggled until Carla caught us. "Whoops! Sorry, Mom," she said before adding, "It's about time." Angela and I behaved ourselves for the remainder of the evening, eagerly anticipating what lay ahead. The following day, while the kids were at school, Angela and I decided to take an extended lunch break and return to the apartment with a sense of pent-up energy. We didn't resume work until just before the end of the workday. As time went on, we continued to take numerous extended lunches, and Angela became increasingly serious about finding a new house. Detective Green would often drop by for casual visits, sometimes admiring the cars. He developed a liking for a Studebaker Hawk previously owned by Roger Ebert, and Angela offered him a good price for it. Unexpectedly, Angela requested that I take her to see Marcy. Despite our reduced number of trips, Marcy didn't seem to object. I asked if there was a specific reason for the visit, to which Angela replied, "Closure." Although I understood the term, the concept felt somewhat abstract to me. I offered to accompany her, but Angela insisted that I simply drive her there, stating that I didn't need to be present during the conversation. On a warm, sunny fall day, we arrived at Muncie. Since the inmate visits were held outside, I parked by the fence. 10 minutes later, Marcy and Angela emerged into the exercise yard and sat at a table, chatting and smiling as if they were old friends. Things took an unexpected turn. After 5 minutes, Marcy's smile vanished, and she leaned across the picnic table, scowling at her visitor. Meanwhile, Angela remained cheerful. Suddenly, Marcy lunged across the table, attempting to grab Angela. The commotion was swiftly quelled by several guards who escorted my ex-wife back into the building, where she protested vehemently. Angela glanced at me, smiled, and shrugged before departing the visitors' area. She was still grinning when she returned to the car. "What was that all about?" I questioned. "Your ex-wife is quite touchy," Angela remarked with a hint of amusement. After driving for several miles, she turned slightly, straining against the seatbelt. I introduced myself, and she seemed pleased to see me. Everything was fine until she thought I was on her side. I admit I may have misled her a bit at first. "How so?" I inquired. I told her I came from Baltimore seeking revenge. That seemed to satisfy her because she thought I meant against you. "Absolutely. What I really meant was that I intended to seek retribution against Tony by assuming control of his business. I suppose you can still seek revenge against a deceased person, right?" "All right, but what caused her to become so upset?" "She wanted specifics, like when, where, and how." Naturally, I knew she was referring to you. Now I was becoming intrigued. I informed her that it would take a considerable amount of time and inquired if she wished to be kept updated on the progress. She eagerly consented and insisted on knowing precisely how I planned to accomplish it. When I divulged my strategy, she became furious. She completely lost her composure. It was quite remarkable. All right. How on earth do you plan to eliminate me?" "No, I genuinely want to know." Her smile widened. "I informed her that I intended to exhaust you to pass away." "That's all?" "Indeed. Isn't it amusing? I thought she might become angry, but I never anticipated her reaction to be so extreme." There was a brief moment of silence. We both sat there smiling. I felt immensely proud of her. "When do you intend to commence this endeavor?" "As soon as we arrive at the next motel, silly." 2 months later, Angela and I tied the knot. It was a carnal ceremony in the backyard of our new residence. Angela sent Marcy a wedding invitation along with a brief note enclosed. "Everything is proceeding as planned. You should be deceased in 40 or 50 years.